Happy Survivor Series weekend, or I'm sorry, Survivor Series season. Happy weekend, happy Sunday, happy time. What's going on, guys? We are here for a fun, casual, laid-back Survivor Series related live stream. I promised you guys I was going to do something like this leading up to Survivor Series, and it's been a while since I talked about these shows. These are 30-plus years old. And I wanted to kind of go back and take a look at the origin of Survivor Series and discuss my memories of them, which I have a plethora of, and kind of do this like a casual type of hangout. This is going to be a YouTube-only special. I'm not going to bother with putting the audio up on the podcast sites because I think there's going to be a lot of discussion, a lot of interacting with the chat, talking with you guys if any of you have any memories of this. And I'm going to be kind of going off on little tangents here or there as I discuss my personal memories, some of the angles, storylines, and situations revolving a lot of the wrestlers that we're going to discuss tonight, and basically just talk about the good old days, because I think a lot of people have been pining for that lately, and I got a lot of memories, man. I've been watching wrestling for 40 years, and I remember this time period very well. Let me just make sure I can be heard. Special. All right, good. Remember that one time a couple weeks ago I sounded like Darth Vader? That's going to paranoid me now forever. Hello to everybody that's in here right now. Mr. T, Ramon, Chat Site Forums, Jet, The Hawk, Sunnyman, Big J, Liam, Stone Cold, How Wheezy. Glad we got a moderator in here. Ben, Espiniza, Bo. Good amount of people in here. I don't know what we're going to have tonight. This is talking about two shows that fans probably don't even care about, and most of you probably weren't even born. Plus, it's kind of an odd time. I don't even know what kind of audience we're going to do here tonight, which is why I wanted to treat this thing very casually. So I did rewatch both of these shows last week, even though I pretty much already know them by heart. I made all of my notes, all of the results, and I'm also going to talk about a lot of personal stories as I go through here, what my memories of some of these angles were, what happened to me on both of these nights, on Thanksgiving night in 1987 and 1988. And it should make for a fun, just kind of casual live stream. Unfortunately, I don't have any bubbly open in the fridge, but I do have beer. So I'm drinking a couple of Stellas and just going to kick back and talk some wrestling. Make sure there's nothing I missed in here. If anybody sends a super chat throughout the duration of this, I will answer it. Might not get to it right away, but I'll be pausing in between to catch some of those up as well. Hope you guys have been having a great weekend. By the way, thank you to those of you who were here yesterday for another live Winged Eagle podcast. It was a lot of fun, about an hour and a half long. If you haven't seen that yet, check it out. It's on my channel right now, and that was done yesterday. And, you know, the plan is to be up here tomorrow night as well for Monday Night Raw. So you're going to get a lot of me. But like I said, tonight we're going to talk about the good old days of Survivor Series. We're going to talk about the origin of Survivor Series, when this pay-per-view started, how it started, and what my memories are of it. And we're going to talk about, of course, Survivor Series 1987. Very cool. I remember having to rent this in the video store because, as I'm about to talk about here in a minute, I did not see this show live because something really gnarly happened to me. But the next year, I did see it live, did order it on pay-per-view, and I've got this VHS tape as well. So I've always had a good time going back and watching these shows because the way they were set up, and, you know, when you watch the crowd, you know, in some of these older shows, man, they were just so hot for everything. And you see the way, you know, wrestling is now, where everybody's just numb and you can have the most spectacular, most amazing moves and the greatest wrestling match of all time. And not only do you have some fans not enjoying that, you have some fans criticizing it. Where back in the day, a simple hip toss, arm drag, body slam would be enough to erupt an entire 20,000 seat arena. So wrestling has changed. Me and Brian Zane from Wrestling with Regret just now on Twitter are having this exhausting discussion with a fan that's just too young to fucking get it. You know, and speaking from a completely whack perspective, and it's just, you really do have a division in the wrestling audience right now, and I think a lot of the anger, a lot of the criticisms, and a lot of the over-the-top, loud, harsh opinions that you see from the wrestling audience tend to come from people that are so ridiculously young, their frame of reference is just completely upside down, you know, where older folks like myself, you know, who kind of grew up in the 70s and 80s and remember the actual evolution of the business and remember how it felt at the time, you know, our perspective is going to be different than yours, plain and simple. And I think that is part of the reason why you have such division. That is part of the reason why you have the crazy Jim Cornettes, you know, out there. And then you have, you know, the crazy fans that shit rubs off on. And next thing you know, it turns into a debate that at the end of the day isn't even important and doesn't matter, has no bearing on anything. And back in the day, during these 1980s pay-per-views and these events, Twitter wasn't around. I think it would be really interesting if it was back then, just to see the way the fans would shit on some of the things we're going to talk about here. And trying to look at things back then from a current or modern wrestling fan's perspective. If I'm trying to put myself inside their head, looking back on this, you know, I'd be fucking clueless as hell. So we're going to discuss some of these shows and some of the events of Survivor Series 1987 and 1988. And I think you guys will enjoy it, even if you weren't around, even if you weren't alive, or even if you were super young or really don't remember it, or maybe were alive but weren't watching wrestling at that time. I think you'll enjoy how we discuss this here, because I'm going to talk about, I'm not just going to blindly read through results. We're going to talk about stuff. I'll discuss what I remember of it and what a fan of my age, how I perceived some of these angles. Because looking back, you know, hindsight's always 20/20, but how I kind of experienced these stories as they happened, I think is very valuable kind of, you know, memories to be able to share. So I'm happy to be able to do that today. And I did do a review a few years back on Survivor Series 1987, but it got taken down pretty quick. I had a good amount of views on it too, but back then I was using a little bit of footage and I wasn't quite sure how to use it yet and what, you know, falls under fair use and what doesn't. And of course that video got yanked and I never really redid it. And I never did a review on Survivor Series 1988. So since these shows were both in the same arena, they were both very similar, both on Thanksgiving night and both about the same length, I kind of thought I would combine both of them and we'd do a double review, double feature here today. Before we get going, I do see a super chat coming in through my peripherals over here. I've got my stream and my notes here, and I've got the super chats, or I'm sorry, I've got the chat over here, so I'll do my best to eyeball this. Stone Cold, thank you for the $5, brother. I appreciate it. Although I wasn't born during this era, I do very much enjoy it. Hogan, or I'm sorry, Warrior, Luger, and others are some of my favorites. Yeah, because when you go back and you look at those guys and see the way the crowd reacted to a lot of them, think about if you put yourself inside the mind of a modern wrestling fan and how fucking snarky they are and shit. Imagine what they would think watching guys like Warrior and Luger wrestle in their prime. You know, if they're getting mad at Moxley and Omega for putting on an awesome match, what are they going to say about these two guys that couldn't wrestle themselves out of a wet fucking paper bag? So it's a good thing social media didn't exist back then, because wrestling would have been ruined far earlier than it got ruined by this nonsense. But anyway, we're going to start with Survivor Series 1987. A lot of backstory to this. Not only is there a backstory to me personally, there's a backstory as to how this pay-per-view got started. Now, Survivor Series kicked off on Thanksgiving night, November 26th, 1987. Now, the reason Survivor Series was created was pretty much twofold. I think WWE wanted to expand. They were just off the heels of an extremely successful WrestleMania 3 right in the town that I was born in, of Pontiac, Michigan. And here we are a mere 9 months later, and they want to expand and add a second pay-per-view to the calendar, which is smart, right? You know, WrestleMania did huge business. You know they can keep it going with Survivor Series, and this whole entire pay-per-view is being centered around Andre the Giant not stepping foot inside of a wrestling ring since WrestleMania 3. I think right after that, he had another back procedure done, and he was on the shelf for quite some time. So they had a long time to put Hogan and build for Hogan and Andre to get back together after what some thought was a controversial WrestleMania 3 match, because at that time they were still heavily promoting, especially especially Jesse and Bobby Heenan, that Hogan got pinned in that WrestleMania 3 match and got a shoulder up at the last minute, and Morella, goofed up the count or whatever. So they were still really trying to make it feel like a Hogan-Andre confrontation was a huge deal. So of course you're going to want to put this on pay-per-view, right? Well, the story, though, is that WCW, or the NWA, had been running Starrcade. Now, even though WWE was the pinnacle, even though WWE was right off the heels of the biggest wrestling show in history, WrestleMania 3, the Crockett's were still doing business. The Crockett's were still doing big numbers down there. And they were really the only, after Vince started gobbling up the territories, they were the only real true competitors, I believe, because even AWA was pretty much out of the running by that point. So NWA was it, and they were still super hot. They were drawing huge numbers in the South and still packing out arenas and had a lot of stars that were very, very popular. So in order to combat that, they decided to, after Starrcade's already been announced and on the calendar, they announced that they're going to do Survivor Series on the same night, and they're going to run head-to-head with Starrcade. Now, initially, I guess it was thought that, well, cool, cable companies, because back then, it's not like now. Back then, I think each individual cable company wherever the market is needs to be negotiated with individually. So you had to go around and make deals with all of them. It wasn't like you had 2 top people like you do now or whatever. So it was very different how you did it back then. So the cable companies, I think, initially thought that with Survivor Series and Starrcade both being on the same night, and with the Crockett's even moving Starrcade up a few hours to get it out of the way of Survivor Series, the cable companies thought they could offer like a package deal. Oh shit, we'll just give them a special. They can get 2 wrestling shows, and everybody gathered around their TV on Thanksgiving Day with their families can watch back-to-back wrestling shows without having to pick one. But WWE didn't want that. WWE basically threatened all of the individual cable companies that if they did not carry Survivor Series 1987, that they would not get WrestleMania 4 in March of the following year, in 1988. And all of the cable systems, they buckled. I think the only one that didn't cave in, there's like 4 that didn't cave in. So they were able to severely cockblock NWA, and it was really, you go back and see a lot of these just cutthroat business stories and some of the things that Vince McMahon did, and forcing cable companies to do that instead of, looking back on it from my perspective, I would have loved to be able to get both shows, for maybe a discounted price, because every Thanksgiving was pretty typical. In my childhood, we had family in town, aunts, uncles, and cousins, and we'd either go somewhere or they would come to us, but we would have that very typical, 20 people in a house for the weekend Thanksgiving pretty much every year. And I would have loved to have 2 wrestling shows during all this. So the very origin of Survivor Series is kind of controversial because the whole thing was created basically to hinder the growth of NWA and try to put the brakes on the business that they were doing. Now, at the same time, simultaneously that all of this happening, the Crockett's were making huge business mistakes. They were overspending. NWA and WCW. NWA, which would become WCW, was already starting to have the financial troubles, even though you had guys like Ric Flair and the Four Horsemen and so many great wrestlers over there that were hot as hell and super over and still packing out arenas. I think they were trying to go too far. They were trying to spread out a little bit too much instead of staying where the bread is buttered. And as a matter of fact, the Starrcade that went head-to-head with Survivor Series here was in Chicago after previously being in Greensboro. So I think a lot of the Southern fans, kind of resented that they moved it to a bigger market like Chicago. And they were in a much bigger market, actually, than a Survivor Series that was in Richfield. So it was kind of a weird time and kind of interesting how the whole thing came together. And here we are just, a week away, 1 week from tonight. We've got the 32nd or 33rd installment, whatever it is, of the Survivor Series here in 2019. And if you would have told childhood Greg that I'd be up here in 2019 talking about these shows in front of a bunch of people on the interwebs, I wouldn't even know what the hell you're talking about. But anyway, Jay Hunter, good to see you in here, man. How have you been? Good to see all y'all in here. Yeah, about 100 people in here. I'm not expecting a huge audience today. But let me tell you about, first off, what happened to me on Survivor Series in 1987. I've maybe touched on this a few times in live streams, but I've never really told the story. And it's still pretty traumatizing. But of course, Survivor Series was on Thanksgiving night. I was aware of this. I did know it was happening. And my parents got me the Survivor Series the next year, but for some reason they didn't get it for me this year. But it wasn't going to matter after what I'm about to tell you. One of the traditions that we had in my house is that I had 2 cousins, two boy cousins that were my age. One was 3 years older than me, and one was like 6 months older than me. And it was my mom's sister's kids. They lived in Philadelphia, and we lived in North Carolina. So every Easter and every Thanksgiving, we would alternate. We would drive up there to Philly for like Easter, and then at Thanksgiving, they'd drive down to us in North Carolina. And that would give us, me a chance to hang out with my cousins who felt more like brothers than really cousins. We always had a great time. We'd play tackle football, or as Mick Foley calls it, kill the guy with the ball, in the backyard every Thanksgiving and every Easter. And we'd get around with the neighborhood kids. My friends would come over, and play with my cousins. And we'd have these big like football games out in the cold fall weather, and then we'd come in and eat, and then we'd go back to doing more shit. And it was just a great time, just great memories of doing that. Well, this year was a little shitty. So it's typical Thanksgiving Day, turkey's in the oven. This is probably, 10 or 11 in the morning, maybe noon. And my cousins and I decide that we want to get on our bikes and we want to ride down to the neighborhood park. There's a pool there and all this shit, but we just really wanted to ride to the park and, just go do something. So we grab all the bikes we can out of the garage, and I let my cousin ride my bike, and I think my other cousin rode my dad's bike, leaving me without a bike. So my mom was like, why don't you just ride my bike? You know, it's like kind of like a girl's bike, but I didn't care. I just hopped on it. I let my cousin have my good bike, which I had a nice like Schwinn mountain bike type of thing. So I hop on my mom's bike, and as we start riding, we don't get very far, and right around the corner from my house is this pretty big hill, pretty steep hill. So we're driving down the hill, and it didn't dawn on me, but I'm just a kid, and I have never ridden a bike with handle brakes before in my life. Oh yeah, that's right. My bike wasn't a mountain bike. It was like a BMX. It had those, the brakes that you brake with the pedal. So I'd never ridden a bike with handle brakes. So as we're going down a hill, there's a car coming, and it's going kind of fast, and I don't know what happened, but it spooked me, and I immediately start just in a panic because I'm going fast down the hill. I start just squeezing the handle brakes without knowing what I'm doing. I squeeze the front brakes. Pew, torpedo. Right over the handlebars. The very first thing to touch the concrete are my front teeth. And I smack my face on the concrete. I roll. I hit the car, bounce right off of it. And as if nothing ever happened, I bounce right up and just run, screaming, full blast, back to the house. Just leave the bike, leave everything. Screaming at my cousin, like, just get the bikes or whatever. And I'm screaming at him, handful of teeth and blood. I remember, it's kind of a gruesome image, but I remember like running up to the door and trying to grab the doorknob, but I can't because my hands are just covered in blood and I'm just smearing blood all over the door. My uncle sees me through the window of the door and just jumps out of a seat, and they leap to me, bring me inside, call up my grandmother who's a dental hygienist, and she's trying to tell us what to do. They rush me to the emergency room, and I pretty much spend like 10 or 11 hours in the emergency room on Thanksgiving Day in the hospital with my mom and dad, who are just sitting there, and I've got just gauze and shit all in my mouth. And they get me in there, and the work they had to do on me was extremely painful. They were able to put the teeth back in, but they were just busted and chipped, and they planned on, fixing them once everything got strong again. But they basically had to put wires and hold all my teeth in place for long enough for them to kind of heal a little bit before they could go over them. So it was kind of a traumatizing experience, and I had only lived in North Carolina for about 2 months. We had moved from Michigan. I just started in a new school, and now I got to show up to school with some busted teeth for a few months until my mouth is strong enough for them to fix them. It was kind of traumatizing, and, kids can be ruthless, and I had to go through a lot of shit, for a few months there, until I got older and it all blew over, and then I had friends and it wasn't a big deal anymore. But, looking back on that was just really a horrible story. So anyway, Thanksgiving dinner, needless to say, was ruined. We were in the hospital all night, and my aunt and uncle and my cousin stayed back at the house. By the time they bring me home, it's like 11 o'clock at night. They all try to have some turkey, but by this time it's dried and busted, and the gravy is black, and it's just a huge mess. And I'm out of it because who knows what sort of pain medication they put me on, but I'm sure I had Percocets running through my veins. And I remember laying down on the couch and somehow being able to be coherent enough, which I don't understand at this age and how drugged up I probably was. I was coherent enough. They kind of left me alone in like the den where there's a TV. And I remember being the only one in there laying on the couch. They're probably going to try to let me sleep. But I grabbed the remote and I turned it to the pay-per-view station. And I was able to listen to like the main event of the pay-per-view through the scrambled box, because I think what they did is they played like a replay, because this was super late at night. And I remember listening to the entire like Hulk Hogan versus Andre the Giant match. And I remember as soon as the VHS tape came out at the video store, I went and rented it, which was, again, hard to do. I think my local video store had one copy, and it took me forever to finally get my hands on it. But yeah, that's kind of the way wrestling was back then. It was so different, and kind of a crazy story. Horrible Thanksgiving Day. Not one of the best. They would be awesome ever since then, but that was a day that I'll never forget. Yeah, ouch, right? So yeah, that's kind of the story there as to what happened to me on the day of Survivor Series 1987. It's a day I'd like to forget. Damn, yeah. Still hurts my teeth to think about that. But anyway, we went through what happened to me. We went through the backstory of Survivor Series. Let's talk about Survivor Series itself. This was in Richfield, Ohio, at the Richfield Coliseum. Kind of a strange choice for this. They would go back there the very next year, and they would return, I think, in 1992. They would go back to Richfield, so very strange choice. But maybe the venue wasn't as important back then. I don't know. And the crowd, though, for Richfield was amazing. I mean, they were so hot for everything here. And like I said, this was all built around Hogan and Andre the Giant. We had Gorilla Monsoon and Jesse Ventura on commentary. They were introduced to the live audience by Howard Finkel. Man, just Howard introducing Gorilla and Jesse to a live audience is pretty cool to see. Now, I watched the WWE Network version of these. I have these, I have these VHS tapes digitalized. But I wanted to watch just the network version instead. It was easier. The network versions are longer than these. These are only 2 hours, so pretty much the full pay-per-view is available on the network. But again, there's so much editing. There's so much like music dubbing, which was absolutely infuriating going through that. But it was also pretty cool just to see and just to be reminded of how awesome things were. Like, for example, we're about to go into our first match, and after Gorilla and Jesse get done going over the rules, saying hello to everybody, wishing everybody happy Thanksgiving, they cut backstage to Craig DeGeorge, another name from the past that I used to love watching, and he's doing a backstage interview with Team Honky. Now, the first matchup would be Team Honky versus Team Savage, and what they would do for the majority of all of these matches in the first 2 years is they would do a backstage interview prior to the match with the entire team and the managers, and everybody is psyched. Everybody's going crazy. You had Honky Tonk Man. By the way, Team Honky Tonk is Honky Tonk Man, Dangerous Danny Davis, Outlaw Ron Bass, Hercules Hernandez, and King Harley Race. So they're in the back with all their managers. You got Jimmy Hart, and you've got Bobby the Brain Heenan, and everybody's jumping around, screaming and yelling. They are all coked out of their minds completely. They do the same thing with Team Savage. Team Savage consisted of Macho Man Randy Savage, Jake the Snake Roberts, Brutus Beefcake, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, and Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. And I want you guys, if I'm talking to you here and you have any sort of curiosity about this show at all, and you do decide to look it up on the WWE Network, watch this backstage interview and tell me what the hell is wrong with Brutus Beefcake. Every damn one of these guys are coked out of their mind. And the teams themselves are interesting because I can't tell you as a kid how eerie and spooky it was to me to see Macho Man Randy Savage and Ricky the Dragon Steamboat on the same team just months after the feud that they just had. And by the same token, like we'll talk about in the main event, to see Hulk Hogan and Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff on the same team was crazy to me. And as a kid, I had a hard time wrapping my head around it. I'm like, how can this be? You'd think I was a little smart saying it doesn't make any sense because that's the way I felt. I mean, it was really just weird. I could not believe that they had put their differences aside enough. But back then, it's like if you were a babyface, you were just automatically friends with people. Even if you had a huge issue with a wrestler when you were a heel and then you turned babyface, by default, in WWE's 1980s mind and logic, you are friends with that person. Doesn't matter what your history is. They refused to be realistic. Really, Savage and Steamboat should have still had some bad blood there. At least they should have just said, we're going to put our differences aside tonight for the good of the team, but I still think you're a piece of shit kind of thing. But no, they were like kissing cousins. Crazy. So when people say Orange Cassidy with his hands in his pockets doesn't make sense, none of the shit made any more sense either. But I always thought that was crazy, as a kid. And when you look at Savage's team, he would go on to have a major feud with every single one of those opponents. He had a major feud with Ricky the Dragon Steamboat just that year prior. He would go on to have a pretty big feud with Beefcake, like in '89 when Zeus came in. And of course, he beat Jim Duggan for the crown. And he had, who can forget his feud with Jake the Snake Roberts. So he had some big feuds with everybody on his team. But look at those Hall of Famers, man. I mean, just say those out loud. Savage, Steamboat, Jake, Duggan, Beefcake. Well, maybe not Beefcake. But he's in the Hall of Fame now. All those guys are, right? They are. Let me see. Jake, Duggan's in. Jake. Yeah, they're all in the Hall of Fame. Honky Tonk Man's team was somewhat weak. Dangerous Danny Davis was, he sucked. Outlaw Ron Bass, by that point, was kind of on his way out. Hercules was on the verge of a face turn, and Race would be getting hurt pretty soon as well. So not the strongest team, but Honky was recently became Intercontinental Champion and was right off the heels of that big Saturday night's main event match with Macho Man where Savage almost won back the title, but Bret Hart stopped it, and then that's when Hogan ran out and the Mega Powers were born. So that had just happened. So Savage is still chasing the Intercontinental title at this point, which is why you have this match. And then him and Honky would go into February and have that big match on NBC on the main event, where Honky reportedly refused to do the job, and turned out well for Savage because he would go on to win the WWE title at WrestleMania 4. When they were doing the entrances here, I talked about the dubbed out music. They had Steamboat's music dubbed out, which I don't think WWE owns that. That's the same, I don't know what it's called, but the name of that song, they used to use it in the Chicago Bulls intro to their team back when Michael Jordan played for the team. And they used it for Ricky Steamboat too, so they must not own that. I don't even know the name of the song, but they dubbed that out and it sounded so bad. But some of the notable things in the match, Hacksaw Jim Duggan and Harley Race were involved in a big feud at that point, so they both got double DQ'd during a brawl, or maybe it was a double count out on the outside of the ring when they were brawling. Outlaw Ron Bass pinned Brutus Beefcake after a high knee, which was funny. He was pinned by Brutus after a high knee, and what was funny is after Brutus pinned Bass, Hercules dropped an elbow on Bass by mistake, just adding insult to injury. And 1 year later, the two of them would be involved in a pretty heated feud, and they would both be on the same or on opposite sides of teams in the opening match again the following year. As a matter of fact, Honky Tonk Man's team here, I think he's got three of the same guys. Bass, Honky, and Danny Davis would be on the Survivor Series 88 team together. So a lot of these guys didn't really change much in the year from 87 to 88. Danny Davis did finally get nailed with a DDT. They got his ass out of there. Randy Savage pinned Hercules after the big top rope elbow. They would be partners next year in 1988. And that pretty much left like Honky Tonk Man all by himself. So he took a hike. He just hightailed it out of there and saved his Intercontinental title. He would come back later in the show, right before the main event, and do one of those podium interviews with Craig DeGeorge, where he basically just challenges everybody, including Hogan. He says he's still the champion, and even though he ran away, he survived, and he considers himself a winner for running away like that and not wanting to take on, Jake and Savage and Steamboat. That would have been crazy. So Honky left, saved his title, and he would remain Intercontinental champion all the way up until the next year's SummerSlam, which is insane because I think he won the title in May of 87. So he would hold it until August of 88, which is, just looking back, pure madness. Pure, total madness. What's going on over here in the chat? Let me move around here so I can see you guys. All right, good. No super chats that I missed. Huh. Yeah, the Richfield Coliseum is where the Cavs had originally played as well. So, I just thought it was a strange venue to do twice. I guess it was kind of close to their home turf, so it's not that weird, but they went back to it twice, which was odd. Let's talk about what's next on the list here. I think it's the women's match we got to talk about next. Now, they didn't do a women's match in 88, but in 87 here, this was when the Fabulous Moolah had turned babyface, which is kind of funny. She teamed up with the Jumping Bomb Angels, who I've talked a lot about over the years, and Rockin' Robin. Rockin' Robin, she was briefly the WWF Women's Champion. She beat Sensational Sherry for the belt, I think, and then Sherry won it back. And at one of the WrestleManias, was it 4 or was it 5? I think it was 5. She sang the national anthem, or she sang America the Beautiful, and it sucked. She was terrible. But little known fact about Rockin' Robin, she's actually the sister of Jake the Snake Roberts. And Jake would have and the two of them have another sibling that would be in next year's Survivor Series, Sam Houston. But Rockin' Robin, I remember when she won the title, it was crazy. But they would all team up, or they teamed up with Velvet McIntyre to take on Donna Christianello, Dawn Marie, the Glamour Girls, and Sensational Sherry. Now, the Glamour Girls were the WWE Women's Tag Team Champions around that time. Now, I invite you to look up the history of the WWF Women's Tag Team Championship, because it's really interesting. When you go back, or when you think about how just wrestling is now and what we've seen over the years, this story is pretty crazy. Now, I didn't research this before I'm telling it, so I might have it a little bit wrong here, but the gist of it is that I believe the Glamour Girls, or maybe it was another team, were the women's champions in the NWA, but they got signed to WWE, or they left and jumped to WWE, and WWE just made them their women's tag team champions. Now, I can't remember if that was two other women who were defeated by the Glamour Girls or the Glamour Girls themselves. The Glamour Girls were Leilani Kai and Judy Martin. They were managed by Jimmy Hart. And I just got to go refresh my memory on that story, but it's pretty cool to see like how some shit went down back in the 80s. It was just so weird. And the tag team titles would be a very short-lived set of belts in WWE. They did not stick around long. The Glamour Girls would drop the belts to the Jumping Bomb Angels, and then they would win them back. And then I think the belts were just defunct. But what was the best thing about this match was how amazingly entertaining the Jumping Bomb Angels were. They were the story of this whole thing. It was a good way to introduce them, and to the American audience and myself, I remember when I rented this and saw it for the first time, I could not believe what I was seeing. Now, I'm not going to give away my exact age, but I was older than 10. So I literally was just blown away. It would be kind of like giving somebody who hasn't watched wrestling since the 1980s and making them watch like NXT or 205 Live now, they'd be going fucking apeshit. So watching them, it was just incredible because they were giving you things. They gave you that feeling, the same feeling I got years later when I started discovering Lucha Libre and the Cruiserweight division in WCW and starting to see different styles and, you know, a lot smaller wrestlers coming in. I remember Rey Mysterio, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. People talk about Marco Stunt being small. Jesus, man. When Rey hit the scene here and the United States audience laid our eyes on him, you know, it looked like he was 8 years old in there, you know, and he was winning and he was good. And it was like, holy shit, wrestling isn't just what we think it is. It's other things too. And when the Jumping Bomb Angels, when I first saw them, that was the same feeling it gave me that I would get years later when I would see some of that other type of wrestling. So they were putting together just really crazy good sequence of moves, stuff that you just, like I said, in the United States, you just didn't see. And they pretty much dominated the whole thing. So the whole thing boils down to the Glamour Girls and the Jumping Bomb Angels. And Jumping Bomb Angels get the win. They eliminate both Glamour Girls and they survive together. This would lead, I can't remember if they beat the Glamour Girls for the titles and then dropped them at the Royal Rumble, or they won them at the Royal Rumble and dropped them somewhere else. I can't remember. But it wasn't long after this that the Jumping Bomb Angels would take the titles for a little while, drop them back, and then the whole thing was over, and we never saw the Jumping Bomb Angels in the WWE again, which sucks. Don't even really know what wound up happening to them, but I'll never forget how amazed I was. And Gorilla Monsoon was, or I'm sorry, and Jesse. It was Jesse more than Gorilla, marking out. I mean, he was just like, he was almost like you could see that Jesse's jaw was hitting the floor. He'd never seen anything like this. And it was showing, it was coming through in the commentary. This was all right in the middle of the feud, too, between Sensational Sherry and Fabulous Moolah, who were the captains of these teams. And like I said, it was kind of weird seeing Moolah as a babyface, but Jesse, I think, had the line of the night where he said, hey, Gorilla, I heard you and Moolah were an item back in 36. So I just loved the little banter back and forth. Now, Gorilla and Jesse didn't have it quite the way Gorilla and Bobby did, but when they would bicker, it was gold. Absolute gold. Almost as entertaining as Gorilla and Bobby, just not quite. But when Jesse would get on Gorilla's case and vice versa, I could literally listen to that shit all day. It's worth going back to watch these shows just to listen to them, just to listen to the commentary and how different it was and how much they aren't like Michael Cole and some of the announcers you see now. Miss those days, man. I wish it was still that time, you know, minus the busted teeth. Yeah, I think you can thank Moolah for a lot of things, Michael, in WWE, that's for sure. Yeah, it was WrestleMania 5. I remember she's an amazing singer. I remember watching that in my house with a bunch of people, and they were all laughing their asses off. I thought it sucked. Maybe I'll have to go back and watch this. All right, Sonic. All right, Mania. I'll take your advice. I'll go back and listen to WrestleMania 5 again. From what I remember, it was bad. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe I'm wrong. I'll admit that. Yeah, I'll go back and take a look at that. But man, I don't really miss the women's division back in those days. I did love Sherry, still miss Sherry to this day. But I don't really have that many fond memories. I was pretty big into it around the Wendy Richter days and shit like that. But by the time they got to Sherry and things started kind of falling apart in the women's division, they never seemed to have like a strong one or a cohesive one. Same thing would happen years later when they would crown Alundra Blaze. They had nobody under contract. She was a champion of a one-woman division, but she had a lot of experience and did a lot of work in Japan and around the world, so they basically relied on her to bring the talent in. and they'd sign them to temporary deals, one-offs, shit like that, just to give Alundra Blaze something to do. The women's division was a fucking joke, and it wasn't much better here in the 80s, but it was a little bit more structured than it would be during the Alundra Blaze days. Man, this is one of my favorites, man. This is what I call the reverse battle royal. Tag team elimination matchup next. 10-man, 20-man tag, 10 on each side, and all the wrestlers are surrounding the perimeter of the ring, which is just crazy, on the ring apron. It's basically like a 20-man battle royal where everybody's on the outside of the ring, which is just a really interesting visual. And I remember when I saw this for the first time, it was hard to kind of comprehend how this match is even going to work. And I'm curious how, like, Pat Patterson or whoever was around that time coming up and trying to put together these matches must have been overwhelming for them, because you didn't see a whole lot of shit like this back in the 80s. There was no track record. You had no ideas to, or no previous matches to take ideas from, anything like that. It was quite crazy. But man, do I have memories of the Hart Foundation dropping the belts to Strikeforce. I was a huge Bret Hart fan by this point. Even as a heel, I was already on the Bret bandwagon, and I really liked the Hart Foundation. And I was at home, and I don't know, I just remember being at night. I remember exactly where I was sitting. I was sitting on my parents' bed, because back in those days, you didn't have like tablets and iPhones. So if the TV was in use in the living room or something, you had to go to another room in the house. That's just the way it was when you were a kid. And there was plenty of times where when I was young like this, I didn't have a TV in my own room yet. Wouldn't get that until I was a teenager. But if somebody was using the TV, you had to go find another one. We had one in the living room, one in my parents' bedroom, and one in the kitchen. So I went in my parents' bedroom, sat on the bed, and turned on WWF Superstars. But for some reason back then, at least during this time, I remember it airing at like 7 o'clock at night. I don't know why. So the match is airing, and I'm watching Hearts and Demolition, and I'm already suspicious, I'm watching Hearts and Strikeforce. I'm already suspicious because it's a title match. And I'm watching it, and I watch Jim Neidhart submit and Strikeforce win the titles. And I remember kind of being a little bit happy because I did like Rick and Tito, but I was like, damn, it kind of just caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting that morning when I woke up to watch the Hart Foundation lose the tag team titles after they've been champions since February. So that was pretty crazy. And this was just days before the Survivor Series. And fast forward to Survivor Series, and the Hearts and Strikeforce are captaining the respective teams. Now on the heel side, you had the Hart Foundation, Demolition, the Islanders, the Dream Team, the new Dream Team, consisting of Greg the Hammer Valentine and Dino Bravo, and the Bolsheviks, who were your resident jobbers at that time. Taking on the Babyfaces, captained by new tag team champions Strikeforce, Rougeau Brothers, British Bulldogs, Killer Bees, and the Young Stallions. And that right there is what a great tag team division looks like. My God, the teams back then. And unfortunately, you have to remember too, unlike now where you just pass around the tag team titles, even if you didn't have 3 different sets of tag team titles and you only had one, you'd still be passing that thing around like a motherfucker. Back then, with all of those great teams, like I said, it's a good thing social media wasn't around back then, because you'd have so many fans now saying, oh, this team deserves it and that team deserves it. And a lot of people now just want to pass around belts like participation trophies and, here you go, it's your turn type of thing. Wasn't like that back in the 80s. You'd have super long runs. It's not like the Hearts were winning it in February, dropping it in March, winning it back in May, dropping it again this summer like you see now. It was like you win the titles and you hold them for a long fucking time. And they made it almost a year until Strikeforce dethroned them, and this was just days before. So it was quite the sight to see, to not only see all those great teams out there surrounding the ring, but to see all the managers. Like every single one of these teams on the heel side was represented by a manager. That's something else you don't see today. So not only do you have 10 people, 10 wrestlers on one team, you have 5 managers. You had Fuji, Jimmy Hart, Bobby Heenan, Luscious Johnny, and Slick, all out there on the heel side, managing their respective teams. So it is just a who's who. When I was watching this back, I'm like, man, I was just like tearing up. It was so awesome. I'm like, these were the days, man. These were the days to see all this talent all in one place, all wrestling together. It was just perfect Thanksgiving type of entertainment, if you ask me. But it was quite the sight to see all that good talent surrounding the ring and to see all those Hall of Fame managers on the outside. Very cool. As far as the match goes, Tito Santana pins Boris Zukov to knock out the Bolsheviks. Demolition Axe, and Demolition would be on their way to the tag team titles at WrestleMania 4. They would be the team to defeat the Strike Force. Axe pinned Jacques Rougeau. Now, Jacques and Raymond were on the babyface side here. They'd be on the heel side the following year, as they were on the cusp of a heel turn as well, right around this time. Demolition would remain strong by getting DQ'd. They would just start beating the shit out of it or double teaming somebody. Referee eventually, I think Axe or Smash doesn't break a chokehold or something. Referee calls for the bell, and like I said, Demolition were just starting now to be pushed as that monster team. Now that Demolition was set, because when Demolition came in, they were first managed by Luscious Johnny before moving over to Fuji. I think Moondog Rex was actually played Smash for a little while until they were able to get Barry Darso in from the NWA. So Demolition took, and even if you go back and look at early Demolition, super early Demolition, they didn't even have their gear quite worked out yet. I remember they used to have like really furry boots, which didn't make any sense. They didn't look right. So it took a good part of 1987. They came in, I think, in early 87, and it took them about 9 or 10 months to kind of really get that team the way they want it. And now that they were ready for the push, and they would get a big one and head on, like I said, to win the belts at WrestleMania. Jim the Anvil Neidhart did pin Tito Santana after Bret Hart hit him with an elbow drop in the back of his head. So the former champions pinned the current champions, and that made me a little bit happy. Haku was mixing it up with Dynamite, and this was an amazing little sequence here. Who'd you like to see in a real fight there? You know, Dynamite Kid, who's got a reputation for being such a bully, such a piece of shit, and he's in there with Haku. I'd pay money to see that shit in an octagon. Hell yeah. But Haku got the pin on Dynamite, hitting him with a thrust kick and pinning him there. Paul Roma pinned Greg the Hammer Valentine after an absolutely spectacularly gorgeous top rope sunset flip, and got rid of the Dream Team there. You know, the Young Stallions, I didn't think at the time there was really room for them when you had Strike Force right there. And as good as Jim Powers and Paul Roma were, they weren't as good as Tito and Rick. And I think you had two teams there that looked identical. Plus, you just had the Can-Ams. You know, Can-Ams had just split up because Tom Zink went to the NWA. He was replaced by Martel. So you went from Can-Ams to Strike Force, and you're going to try to fit in the Young Stallions somewhere. There was just no room for them. They almost got muscled out. They tried to push them. They even got a non-title victory over the Hart Foundation when they were still champions, and would wind up losing their title opportunities. But I remember thinking that there were too many tanned, muscular, brown-haired mullet guys. There was just too many. So the Young Stallions kind of suffered there, but Roma was an athlete, man. I mean, he really was. I mean, a lot of people shit on Paul Roma. Why the hell he chosen to be a horseman and everything. But when you look at him, he has everything a wrestling company would want. He was really supremely athletic, and he did look really good. I think he might have had attitude problems here and there. When you look at him, he definitely gives off that vibe of douche. But every time I saw him in the ring, he sold. He was intense, and did well. I was always, it's crazy to say this, but I'm actually kind of like looking back through modern eyes. I think Paul Roma was a hell of a lot better than Tom Zink, than the Z-Man who got pushed to the moon in WCW. I think Paul Roma had talent. And maybe if Strike Force wouldn't have been a factor, maybe they would have had a chance to get over a little bit more. It's funny how, and another similarity, I just thought about that just now. Another weird kind of obscure similarity between those two teams, Strike Force and Young Stallions, is they both stole Jimmy Hart's songs. That's so weird. So the Pile Driver came out, and there was Girls and Cars. I'm begging y'all, if you have not heard Girls and Cars before, just stop what you're doing. Pause me, turn me off, go on YouTube right now, look up Girls and Cars, and just jam out to that for a few minutes. Oh my God. And I think Jimmy Hart wrote that and helped produce it and all that. And then he had another song called Crank It Up. I think it was Crank It Up. It was on the same album, Pile Driver album I have right up there. I should have pulled it down for you guys. And then they did an angle where the Young Stallions stole that. So Jimmy Hart, because behind the scenes, he was involved in a lot of the music making and helped produce a lot of the WWE themes back then. And I believe if I remember the story right, he just signed away all of his rights to those. So they were able to use those for years to come, even after Jimmy Hart left. But they both did it. Not only were the two teams very similar, they looked exactly alike, same wrestling style, and they have the same deal where they stole theme music from Jimmy Hart. So I just don't think there was any room for the young Stallions, even though I liked them and they were both in phenomenal shape. And Jim Powers would be in and out as a jobber throughout the years before forming the team. He was more of an enhancement talent than anything else. But the team just wasn't going to survive. But around this time, WWE was trying. They were trying their hardest to push these pretty boys. Jumping Jim Brunzell would pin Bret Hart after reversing a crossbody block, so that's kind of sad. And the Killer Bees used to do the thing back in the day where they would put the masks on during a match in order to fool the referee and use the illegal man. As a matter of fact, they won a match on either Superstars or Challenge. I remember watching it live. They beat the Harts when the Harts were champions. Harts were putting everybody over in non-title matches. And they did the mask thing and picked up the victory against them as well, which I believe did lead to a title match that the Harts won. But the Bees were a fun and exciting team too. And again, if the tag team division was not so jam-packed with talent at that time, you know, you could have easily put the titles on the Killer Bees. They were great talents. B. Brian Blair was very good, Florida legend. And Jumping Jim Brunzell was a hell of a talent and I believe had one of the best drop kicks in wrestling. You think to guys in modern times like Randy Orton, Bob Holly, Brian Kendrick, or maybe Paul London, guys like that who have just absolutely beautiful, superb drop kicks. Go back and watch some of Jim Brunzell's. Absolutely magnificent fucking drop kicks. So they beat they eliminated the Islanders. They put the mask on and were able to, I think, the sunset flip Tama of the Islanders to eliminate them. And that would be it. That was the end. They won. They were the survivors. Yeah, they were the survivors. It was the Young Stallions and the Killer Bees. So not at all the way you thought the match would go. You thought it would boil down to the Hearts and Strike Force. They'd be the only two teams left. That's the way I'd have booked it. But instead, they get eliminated early, and you have two random teams that really, at that time, weren't even in tag team title contention. None of them were. The Islanders on the other side, who had also recently turned heel, they weren't really in contention despite being heel. They were kind of feuding with the Bulldogs at the time. And you had two teams wound up surviving there. So congrats to the Killer Bees and the Young Stallions. At least they were given a little bit of a rub there and a pretty big victory in the first ever Survivor Series. Y'all have any memories of Paul Roman? Yeah, and Sam 3, Paul Roman and Hercules would form Power and Glory years later, which I also thought was a good team because Hercules was such a strong guy and Paul Roman was the high flyer, and I thought they had a great finisher. And, you know, we see that finisher now. I can't remember. I don't know if the Revival does it or who does it, but the top rope superplex that Hercules would deliver into the Paul Roma top rope splash, more often than not, when those guys would perform that move, they hit it perfectly. I mean, they timed it, they nailed it, everything was fucking perfect. You couldn't ask for anything better with that. So not only do I think that the Young Stallions were not a horrible tag team, I don't think Power and Glory was a horrible tag team either. I enjoyed them both. Let's have a little more Stella, a little more bubbly before we get into the next match here, which is the main event, by the way. And then we'll move into 1988. The tag team match in 1988 is really interesting. Can't wait to talk about that in a minute. One of my favorite and most memorable matches ever. So anyway, the main event is, like I said, it's being billed as the first time that Andre the Giant has been in the ring since WrestleMania. The first time we're getting that confrontation between Andre and Hulk. That's what WWE was selling this whole pay-per-view on. And you had Team Andre, captained by Andre the Giant, of course, and get a load of this talent. I got to just readjust my seat here before I say the shit out loud. My God. Andre the Giant, one-man gang, King Kong Bundy, that right there is about 9 tons. And then you add the Natural Butch Reed and Ravishing Rick Rude. That's Andre's team. That is a badass fucking team. That's a team right there. Butch Reed, you don't want to fuck with him. Rick Rude, we know he's a badass. Bundy and gang are behemoths. And Andre's unstoppable, right? So this is an unstoppable team, if you ask me. On the other side, speaking of talent, captained by Hulk Hogan, you've got Ken Patera, Paul Orndorff, The Rock, Don Morocco, who was replacing superstar Billy Graham, who they did the injury angle with I believe, Butch Reed and One Man Gang, and a very young and new Bam Bam Bigelow. So this was, to me, this was just an interesting match. I remember when this match was put together, when they were building it on TV, to see all these guys together was something you really hadn't seen. And like I said earlier, with Savage and Steamboat, I was flabbergasted by the fact that Hulk Hogan, assuming that he's the captain and assuming he can select who his partners are, he picked Paul Orndorff, of all people, who he was just off the heels of a really ridiculous feud with. And even Jesse even mentions in the match, he goes, I don't even think Paul Orndorff knows what he wants half the time. Because from the span of 1985 to 1987, Paul Orndorff went from being a heel. He was involved in he was Roddy Piper's tag team partner at WrestleMania 1. Immediately after that, when Piper ditched him, he became a face and was befriended by Hogan. And then he turned on him in a really famous angle on TV where Hogan and Orndorff were taking on Bundy and Studd. And Orndorff hit Hogan with the pile driver, joined the Heenan family, and the two of them would run the house show circuit and fucking sell out. And they had some crazy matches in front of big crowds, steel cage matches, one of the best 1980s feuds that WWE ever had. And it was one of the only feuds that I think could hold up to what they were doing in the NWA. Some of the personal stuff between Dusty and Flair, and how real dirty some of these feuds could get. This feud wasn't as bloody and gritty as that, but it was close. You could feel that there was genuine animosity there. The two Florida boys, jacked up Florida guys, probably from rival high schools, were, and also jockeying for position in the company, made for a really intense feud. And I remember it well. As a kid, I hated Paul Orndorff. So the fact that he went from a heel to a babyface to a heel, turning on Hogan and feuding with him, and then back to a babyface when he gets shit on by Bobby Heenan or something, he wound up feuding with Rick Rude shortly after Rude came in, and I think Bobby dumped Orndorff. So now Orndorff is back to being a babyface again, and he's on the team with Hogan. And like I said, as a kid that was closely following the storylines at that time, that one left me scratching my head. I'm like, why the hell are they together? That's fucking crazy. So crazy time, man, crazy time. But when you look at the talent and you look at the names involved in this main event, it was incredible. They did the backstage interviews for both teams, of course, and it was so crazy to watch everybody on Team Hogan, with Hogan with the bandana hanging in his face, and all the guys are just going nuts and yelling and screaming. It was a mess, and the crowd was on fire for it too. Even during the entrances, when they were coming out, the crowd was just popping so hard for everyone. Finally, you get everybody in the ring. You get the big stare down with Hogan and Andre the Giant. Everybody kind of powders out, and the match begins. Butch Reed got eliminated first, Florida legend, by another Florida legend, Hulk Hogan, got hit with the leg drop. After Butch, this was one of the dumbest parts of the match. It's always bothered me looking back. So after Hogan pins Butch Reed with the leg drop, he starts going over and high-fiving all of his teammates. High-fives Patera, he gets high-fived back, and high-fives everybody, right? As he's high-fiving everybody, Andre steps over the top rope and gets in the ring. He's ready for Hogan because Hogan just pinned Butch Reed. Hogan turns around. He sees Andre. They're about to go at it. And the referee, this is one of my favorite referees too. Or no, this is Joey Morella, not this referee. I was thinking about a different guy. Joey Morella is the referee in this, just like he was for WrestleMania 3. So Morella will not let Hogan face Andre because technically he tagged one of his partners. And this rule has always been flimsy. Sometimes it doesn't matter. If you tag somebody, just tag out. Just tag again, Hogan. If you keep tagging people, just tag again. It shouldn't matter, right? So the referee's insisting that Hogan can't wrestle. And then I think maybe even Gorilla or Jesse tried to claim that you have to touch the opponent before you can tag out. But still, then Hogan should just run over and or tag somebody in. They run over and touch Andre and then tag Hogan in. Whatever it was a stupid excuse to not allow Hogan and Andre to mix it up and to prolong the inevitable confrontation between the two. So I always found that a little bit silly. Ken Patera was the one that had to get in there. And of course, since it wasn't Hogan, Andre wanted nothing to do with it. So he tagged out. And the one-man gang would wind up pinning Ken Patera after a clothesline. Rick Rude would wind up rolling up Paul Orndorff to eliminate him. Don Morocco would then pin Rick Rude after a power slam. Now, what's interesting is Don Morocco and Hulk Hogan had a pretty big issue, too. Don Morocco was instrumental in setting up the King Kong Bundy and Hulk Hogan cage match at WrestleMania 2. So Hogan had a lot of fucking enemies on his team there, which is pretty interesting. And this was back when Morocco was using The Rock as the nickname. And I thought about it too as I was watching the match back. It should be very easy to edit. Go back and find a classic Rock match, but then dub it over with Gorilla and Jesse, because for the most of this match, they weren't calling him Morocco. They were calling him The Rock. So you could probably match up the commentary with a different Rock match, and it would sound like Gorilla and Jesse are calling a match wrestled by The Rock, which I think would be a fun thing to do. If I'm ever bored and want to do something fun in my video editor, maybe I'll put something like that together and put it up on Twitter or something like that. But anyway, this takes a while. After a couple of guys get eliminated, you finally do get the confrontation with Hogan and Andre. They start going at it. Hogan starts winning the fight. They're duking it out and they're no-selling each other. And finally, he starts to push back Andre a little bit and ramming him into the top rope or into the top turnbuckle. As he's kicking the shit out of Andre the Giant, King Kong Bundy from underneath the bottom rope pulls Hulk Hogan out. And Hogan would wind up fighting with the one-man gang and Bundy on the outside of the ring. He would slam the one-man gang, then he would slam King Kong Bundy on the floor. But during all of this, of him beating the shit out of these two guys, Hogan gets counted out, which again, much like the tag team match, kind of surprised me that they would do this. I thought it would come down to Hogan and Andre, but Hogan gets counted out, and in typical Hogan fashion, I've talked about this before, he's a whiny little bitch. Every time Hogan loses, he is a little bitch. And wait, just 2 months after this, in February, when he would drop the belt to Andre on NBC, and he would do the post-match interview with Mean Gene, he's literally crying like a bitch. I mean, he's screaming and whining, I lost my belt! Like his dog got hit by a car or something. Like, he just goes so overboard with it. And I've always said for years that Bobby Heenan was right. Hulk Hogan is a sore loser. Even when he was a babyface, all the matches, he did the same shit at the Royal Rumble. He'd get eliminated and then pull someone out. He did that twice. Did it to Boss Man. Did it to Sid. He's just a sore fucking loser. And it would get better after this. So after Hogan gets counted out, he whines like a bitch. He refuses to leave. He refuses to leave the ring. And then until it takes the ring announcer, I think Howard Finkel says, he has to make an announcement. Like, if Hogan does not leave the ring, then his team will lose or whatever. And I'm like, Jesus. So Hogan, for eating his vitamins and saying his prayers and what's the other one? Whatever the fuck it is, and training, he needs to learn to not be a bitch. Which commandment is that? But yeah, so Hogan pitches a fit. Finally, he's forced to leave, leaving poor Bam Bam Bigelow in there. You got a lot of beef between these four guys. Bam Bam Bigelow is by himself taking on Andre, King Kong Bundy, and the one-man gang. And this is where my childhood memory starts kicking in, because I remember laying there on the couch with, an empty mouth of no teeth and convalescing from my gnar bike accident. And I've got the pay-per-view channel turned on, it's scrambled, and I hear those words are just imprinted on my memory. I'll never forget Jesse, when Bam Bam's left alone, saying, when he's left alone with Andre, some of the things that he was saying near the end there, which I'll mention here in a minute, because before Bam Bam has to face Andre, he actually, after getting his ass kicked for a while, he actually finds a way to pin not only King Kong Bundy with his finisher. He gets Bundy down, hits him with his, it's like a springboard, a splash over the top rope from the apron. Hits Bundy with that, pins him. Then the one-man gang comes in and starts beating the shit out of Bam Bam Bigelow. Goes up to the top rope to hit a top rope splash. Bam Bam moves. Gang lands, nobody home. Bam Bam puts an arm over Gang's chest. The referee counts 3. And that's where I remember the lines coming in. Bam Bam somehow not only beat Bundy, but then he beat the one-man gang. And I remember Jesse saying, now how he beat Bundy, how he beat the one-man gang is beyond me. But to beat Andre the Giant, and then Gorilla's like, anything and everything's possible, but Bam Bam's in a lot of trouble. I will never forget those 2 lines by those 2 guys. It's just something I remember half in a daze, probably half out of consciousness, laying there on the couch and remembering those words spoke in my ear. And I couldn't wait, when I finally saw this and see, because I couldn't see, it was scrambled, and being able to put pictures together with the words was quite amazing when I finally got a chance. You know, it's not like now where you can just go on YouTube and see what happened just minutes before. You had to wait months, you know, to see what the hell happened here. So it was just a different time, man. So Bam Bam, after he eliminates those two guys, he's left in there now with Andre the Giant. And Andre, he tries to avoid him a little bit. You know, Bam Bam was very agile. Even all the way late in his career, he was still super agile. But at this time, when he was super young, and I know around this time he was still in his 20s, he's like cartwheeling and somersaulting around Andre. And Andre, the way he walks without like, you know, he could barely catch Bam Bam. Finally, he catches him, nails him with a couple of punches and hits him with some shoulder tackles in the corner, and then puts him in that kind of like a double underhook or sort of suplex move that Andre started to use in late 87 and early 88. Pretty much the only wrestling move that Andre could execute at that time because he was in such poor health. And this looked like shit. He lifted Bam Bam up. Bam Bam hit the ground, but Andre didn't even land on top of him. He kind of fell backwards and he had to recover and cover Bam Bam. Got the 1, 2, 3, and Andre the Giant is your sole survivor in Survivor Series. Andre wins the main event, and not 5 seconds after the 3 count, as Andre's being announced as the winner, the crowd starts going nuts because Hogan sprints back to the ring with his belt and attacks Andre with the belt, hits him with it a couple of times. Andre goes down, retreats and leaves, and Hogan poses in the middle of the ring like he's the fucking winner. What a douchebag. Looking back, right? Jesus, Hogan. You know, could you never accept defeat ever? Oh my God. Just looking back, he was such a bitch. Man. So, but you know, what's the famous phrase, right? Hogan must pose. So even though he lost and they had to put Andre over there to set up the return match that they would have in February and at WrestleMania 4, you had to put Andre over here, but at the same time, you had to do something to where Hogan can remain strong and Hogan can come back and pose in the end. So every time Hogan acted like a heel, every time Hogan did something heelish, the crowd ate it up. A couple of months later, he would run in the ring in the main event of WrestleMania and whack DiBiase with a chair, allowing Savage to win the belt. This guy is a menace to society, that Hulk Hogan. And I think I tagged him in the picture or in the link on Twitter. So Hogan, if you're listening, what the hell was your problem, man? Back in 1987. Jesus. But anyway, that is your Survivor Series 1987 in a nutshell there. That's my memories of it. That's what happened to me that day, that fateful Thanksgiving night. And yeah, still have a lot of memories of it, man. And watched the show many, many times over the years and still remember it fondly. And I kind of wish that Survivor Series, you know, because back then there really was nothing at stake. You know, now where you have the brand supremacy is at stake or whatever. These were just matches. You just wanted to survive. It was like the early days of the Royal Rumble. The early days of the Royal Rumble, you got nothing except your hand raised. You got no title shot. Nothing. It wasn't until they vacated it and they put it on Flair that year that they realized, well, if we have a Royal Rumble in 92 for the title, just for 1 year, what do we do the next year? You know, we got to give away something, and that's when they started doing the title shot at WrestleMania. So back in these days, there was nothing. I guess it was just bragging rights, and it was just being able to say that you survived. So there you go. There's Survivor Series 1987. Good times, man. Good times. The times would get crazier in 1988. I'm going to take a couple more sips of bubbly and answer some super chats. Chris Ludecki, man, thank you so much for the $5. I appreciate that, and thank you. I think you're the one that sent in the pretty generous one yesterday as well during the Winged Eagle. You are the man. Isn't it funny that in 1-by-1 it takes finishers, or 1-on-1 it takes finishers to beat someone, but with a Survivor Series match, those same people get pinned after one clothesline? Yeah, well, you'll see that a lot too when you go back and watch matches like this, because these are pay-per-views and they're timed and you don't have a whole lot of time to set up your entire sequence of moves and your finishers and stuff. So guys would get taken out with roll-ups, out the ass, clotheslines, random moves, not even finishers. Sometimes finishers would put guys away, but other guys, it would just be a roll-up. And the match that I'm about to talk about here that opens up Survivor Series 1988, I think Warrior was the sole survivor after winning with a double axe handle or something, just not what you'd expect. But yeah, they had to speed up the pace of these matches. And yeah, sometimes you can have guys kicking out of everything under the sun, and then one clothesline puts them down. That's the way it was back then. Yeah, 88 was pretty fun. I probably have a few more fond memories of 88 than I do 1987. Just peeking back over here at the chat, see if there's anybody I need to say hello to. What's that smell? Did you up a lip, bitch? Oh, yeah, I was talking about Hogan earlier when he was crying after he lost the title to Andre, and he's screaming, how much for the plastic surgery? They tried to pass it off like Ted DiBiase had given plastic surgery to a guy to do the dual referee thing. So funny. Look at the $100 bill following out of his pocket, and there was no such $100 bill. Go back and watch that footage a million times. Oh, my God, Hogan was such a little baby about everything. But anyway, let's talk about 1987. Next. Now, this one was very similar to 1988. I'm sorry. This one was very similar to 1987 based on how it was structured and where the matches were and how they were presented. Very much the same show, but still super fun and super interesting and super memorable. So this happened on November 24th, 1988, also on Thanksgiving night, and also in the Richfield Coliseum. Now, I'm happy to say that for this pay-per-view, I actually was able to watch it on pay-per-view, and this was a much better Thanksgiving than 1987 when I got all fucked up and was in the hospital. So this year, the same cousins that were here the year before to watch me get in that bike accident and watch me be a mess for the rest of the weekend, they were back. So we were all back together. We had our fun, backyard football games throughout the entire weekend with the neighborhood kids. We came in, we ate Thanksgiving, we did the whole shebang, and then my parents ordered the pay-per-view for me. Now, my two cousins who were my age weren't wrestling fans, but they knew enough of it. Like, they had friends that watched it, and they, of course, would watch it with me, and they would, tolerate it. And I can remember several times when they would come visit throughout the years, they would watch wrestling with me. I remember watching Saturday night's main events with them when they would come down to visit and all sorts of shit. So they actually always got a kick out of wrestling. And there was a couple things here on the show that had both of them dying laughing. And it's kind of funny to go back and watch it or think about it from somebody who doesn't watch wrestling and is watching this shit for the first time. And you see characters like Bad News Brown or Slick or the Conquistadors, which the theme of this entire night was the yellow guys. Wait until we get to the tag team match, because my cousins didn't know everybody's names and everything, and something crazy happened in the tag team match, and they flat out could not believe how long the yellow guys were lasting. And it's crazy. I just can't wait to talk about that match. But anyway, the show opened up with basically it wasn't team captains anymore because Randy Savage won the title at WrestleMania 4 and Hogan is no longer the champion. But you still have to keep Hogan the top guy. I swear to God, they created this co-captain nonsense just so Hogan could save face, because you can't make Hogan the captain if he's not your champion. You can't make Hogan the captain and have Savage as the champion on the same team. That doesn't work. But you can't make Savage the captain because that's going to hurt Hogan's ego. So they literally, all of a sudden, out of the blue, made this year not captains, but co-captains. Each team would have two captains. How fucking stupid is that? How stupid is that they felt like they had to do that just so they didn't have to diminish Hulk Hogan? What would have been wrong, with having Savage be the captain of the team and Hogan not being or whatever? So the whole thing was just stupid. And it was just a way, I think, for guys like Hogan and Warrior or Hogan and Beefcake to save face, because this show would open with co-captains Warrior and Beefcake captaining their team of the Blue Blazer and Sam Houston and Jim Brunzell taking on Team Honky and Team Bass, I believe, because usually the two co-captains were feuding with each other. So Warrior was feuding with Honky because he just took the belt off of him at SummerSlam, and Beefcake was feuding with Ron Bass. They had that little issue when Brutus Beefcake cut up the belt, and then Ron Bass raked Brutus's forehead with the spurs, and he was bleeding, and it was a fucking mess. And I have a little deja vu story to tell about that too. Another weird sort of childhood memory. And I swear I'm gonna keep this short because it's so fucking spooky and it still weirds me out to this day. But I swear to God, this happened. So I remember laying on the couch, actually watching wrestling, and falling asleep. I dream that, I think this was on a Saturday or something. I dream that there's a storyline or something happens in wrestling where Brutus Beefcake, who at this time had nothing to do with Ron Bass on TV, they hadn't had any matches, nothing. They weren't even associated with each other. I dreamed that Brutus Beefcake, I think it was in a backstage type of setting, took his big scissors, big head shears, and chopped up Outlaw Ron Bass's whip. It was like just in my dream. So I shit you not, just a few days later, I'm watching the WWF Superstars or whatever it is, and they run that angle. I think Outlaw Ron Bass is like beating up a jobber or something too much, and then Brutus runs in to save the day and runs him off and then cuts up his whip, which then leads to like the following week, Ron Bass attacking Beefcake and blooding his face up with the spurs. But I somehow dreamed that before it happened. And I remember being spooked. I remember saying it to like my mother or father. I'm like, I dreamed that would happen. And so I still don't know back in 1988 what the hell was going on in my noodle, but I somehow predicted the future when nobody else could. It's not like there was internet or dirt sheets or anything that you could read these results ahead of time, because I'm sure the shit was taped, but I wouldn't know about it. So I just randomly dreamed this, and then it fucking happened and led to a feud, and I think would get blown off with Brutus winning a hair match, shaving Ron Bass's head bald, and he'd hang around for a couple of more months after that, and then Bass would be gone. But I actually, honestly, had that happen to me where I dreamt something that happened. So anyway, you got co-captains, Warrior and Beefcake against co-captains, Honky and Bass. Brutus Beefcake would dispose of Danny Davis with a sleeper real quick. Go back and watch this and watch how fast Danny Davis goes out from the sleeper. Chris, you were just mentioning the speed of some of these matches and how these guys were taken out and losing. You know, watch how fast. Literally, it's almost like, remember when Perfect, because he had a bad back, but in SummerSlam 1991, as soon as Bret Hart locked in the sharpshooter, Perfect was tapping out. Well, it's like the same thing here. The minute Beefcake had the sleeper hold on Davis, he just went right to sleep. And the referee lifted his hand. I've never seen a referee do the hand check faster. He just lifted it up, lifted it up, lifted it up. 1, 2, 3, down. Danny Davis is eliminated right off the bat. Bad News Brown would eliminate Jim Brunzell next. Now, Jim Brunzell the previous year was with Brian Blair in the tag team match when they were the Killer Bees. Brian Blair had left, and I guess Brunzell was in and out, usually enhancement talent by that point, wearing some very crazy colored tights, and he might have even gone back and done a little bit of work in the AWA. I can't remember because he was a tag team competitor there as well. With Greg Gagne, and then formed the Killer Bees in the WWE. But here he was on his own. And like I said, go back and watch some Jim Brunzell matches, and you tell me, and you find me a better dropkick. That guy was a fucking man. But Bad News Brown hit his finisher, which I liked Bad News' finisher. It was called the Ghetto Blaster. And his opponent's back would be turned to him, and he'd jump up and basically hit him with a kind of like an enziguri or whatever it would be called, right to the back of the neck. You know, really brutal looking shot, and a lot of wrestlers sold it pretty well, you know, and knew how to take that. So he disposed of Jim Brunzell. Now, Bad News Brown was your modern day Stone Cold, or your I guess modern day, what's the word I'm looking for here? He was the Stone Cold Steve Austin, basically, of that era. Didn't get along with anybody, talked a lot of shit. He was quite funny. My two cousins laughed their asses off during his interviews. He would cut a backstage promo later on in the show where he'd be calling out Randy Savage, and he'd be giving Sean Mooney all sorts of shit and looking at him all funny and saying all sorts of hilarious stuff that had my two cousins, who were non-wrestling fans, rolling on the floor laughing. But anyway, because Bad News is kind of a loner, doesn't like anybody, there is a little bit of miscommunication between him and his team. I think he got into it with Valentine or something like that. So Valentine, who was also in the tag team match the previous year as well, which is kind of interesting, got into it with Valentine. He gets pissed and walks out. So Bad News just leaves, gets himself intentionally counted out. So Bad News is gone. Ron Bass would be in the ring. He'd be taking on Sam Houston. Did I even mention who these teams were? I did, right? Yeah, Team Warrior, Beefcake, Blazer, Sam Houston, and Brunzell against Honky Tonk, Davis, Bass, Valentine, and Bad News Brown. But Outlaw Ron Bass would pin Sam Houston, which earlier on in the match too, Sam Houston, man, like I mentioned, he's the brother of Jake the Snake Roberts and Rockin' Robin. He was selling his ass off for Bad News Brown, and I remember the stigma on him at the time was that he was too small. He was tall just like Jake, and he was thin and lanky just like Jake, but Jake was still bigger. So Sam Houston, Jesse used to shit all over him. Like, this kid's not going to amount to anything. He's just too damn small. There's no way. But Sam Houston, when you go back and watch him, he can sell, man. Watch the way he was taking all that offense from Bad News. It looked pretty good. But Outlaw Ron Bass got rid of Sam Houston. Greg the Hammer Valentine tapped out Owen, put Blue Blazer in the figure 4 leg lock, and poor Blue Blazer had to tap out to that. Beefcake and Honky would get into it. They had a long-running feud as well before Beefcake ran into Ron Bass. He was scheduled to face the Honky Tonk Man again for the Intercontinental title, and the Ultimate Warrior got the spot instead. So Beefcake and Honky still had some animosity there. They got into a big brawl on the outside of the ring and got counted out. So in every one of these matches, somebody's got to get counted out or DQ'd. That left the Ultimate Warrior all by himself against Outlaw Ron Bass and Greg the Hammer Valentine. Warrior quickly disposed of Ron Bass and then hit Greg Valentine with a double axe and pinned him real quick. And again, going back to how fast some of these matches were, as soon as the Warrior hit Valentine, that referee's hand came down 1, 2, 3, like instantaneously. It was over like that. And the Ultimate Warrior, much to no one's surprise at that time because he was fucking unstoppable, was the sole survivor in that match. So that was a pretty good opener, pretty fun opener. The fans were into it. And I remember at the time, kind of being a Warrior mark. I liked it. Didn't mind it so much. How are we looking over here in Mr. Chat Room? All right, 100 people have been in here the whole time. I guess I can live with that. I was not expecting much for talking about a show that's 32 years old. But the next match was the tag match, just like we had last year. And it was another interesting match with all sorts of interesting little footnotes in there, which we'll talk about in a minute. I want to see if there's anything else I want to read about in the chat. Yeah, I don't talk much about World Class. I watched a little bit of World Class, and then I remember being able to see it a lot on ESPN. I don't know how much I could really put together because I didn't, even though I'm very familiar with the history of it, it doesn't resonate with me as much as some of this other stuff does. So I'm usually better talking about stuff that I have personal memories of and have personal experiences of, and that I can talk about and give you my thoughts, based on my perception and where I was at the time. That's kind of when I feel like I do reviews the best. So that's why I like to talk about stuff like this, because I have so many memories of all these wrestlers. But the tag team match here in 1988 was also interesting. So they did a double turn. Now, back in these days, at my age, I wasn't sure what a double turn was. As a matter of fact, as I'll talk about here later on with what we saw in the finish, I had a complete wrong idea of what actually happened. I didn't even think it was a double turn. I just thought it was a turn. So anyway, we'll talk about that. This tag team match comprised of tag team champions Demolition teaming up with the Bolsheviks again, the Rougeau brothers, who were now heels after being babyfaces last year. The Brainbusters, Tully and Arn, were recently in the company, and the Conquistadors. So the tag team division was light around this time. A couple of teams from the previous year were broke up, like Valentine and Bravo, and like the Killer Bees. So they had to bring in, and the Islanders, I think, were gone too at this time. So they had to bring in, they were, because Haku would be in the main event. So they had to bring in the Conquistadors, who at this point could have been anybody. I have no idea who were under the masks in 1988. And they would be taking on the team of the Powers of Pain, the Young Stallions again, the British Bulldogs again, and get this, the Hart Foundation, who are now babyfaces, heel the previous year, and the Rockers. Now, a couple of interesting things here about this team. I'm pretty sure that this was the Bulldogs last night, I think. I'm pretty sure this was the Bulldogs last night. This was right after the infamous incident with Jacques Rougeau and Dynamite Kid, where Jacques sucker punched Dynamite, knocked all his teeth out. And they had to kind of bury the hatchet there. They did work a little bit in this match too, which was interesting. And a lot of stuff was going on with Dynamite personally around this time. And I don't think the Bulldogs worked again after this match. I'd have to check the history books there, but I think that was it for the Bulldogs. And it was also kind of interesting and cool to see them on the same side as the Hart Foundation, who, had a really memorable feud for me as a kid. Those are my favorite teams. I love the Harts and the Bulldogs. They're still my number 1 and 2 tag teams ever in WWE. So to see them together, I remember liking that. Plus, there's so much history there with those guys and how far back Brett goes with Dynamite, and of course all of the family implications there too. So that was kind of cool to see them on the same side, but also kind of bittersweet to see one of my favorite tag teams pretty much gone from the WWE after this point. And two more wrestlers that are on the same team in that match is none other than Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart. So you had Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels on the same team in 1988, and boy, if you could have whispered in their ears in 1988 and tell them that what was going to happen to them in 1997, they would have both looked at you cross-eyed. So when I thought about it too, Shawn and Bret Hart at Survivor Series, at the first few Survivor Series, they were together in 1988 on the same team. They wrestled in a one-on-one match in the main event of Survivor Series 1992. The following year, Shawn Michaels would take the place of Jerry Lawler and face Bret Hart's team at the Survivor Series. So that's 2 years in a row. And then in 1997, of course, would be the Montreal Screwjob. So in the first 10 years of Survivor Series, Bret and Shawn were together for 4 of them. That's kind of crazy. Bret Hart would get pinned by Tully Blanchard. Tully kind of reversed an inside cradle or something. Bret had his shoulders down. Got a quick pin on Bret Hart, and I really always enjoyed the few matches that we got between the Hart Foundation and the Brain Busters, because when Tully and Arn came in, that was like big news, and you knew they were pushing them towards the belts. Demolition, they would take the belts off of Demolition the following year, and they were just starting to get rolling. And to see like Bret Hart in the ring with somebody like Tully Blanchard, to me, was a treat. It was always a treat. I know the two teams faced at SummerSlam 89. I think it was the following SummerSlam. The Harts faced the Brain Busters. That was a fun match, and they worked a lot on live events and a lot of Madison Square Garden shows. I know that. And a lot of TV shows, when they would do like primetime wrestling. I remember several matches between the Busters and the Harts there too. Brain Busters, I think at this time, their initial program was with the Rockers. So they would wind up getting that token double DQ that we see in all of these matches. Tully and Arn brawling with Marty and Shawn all the way down the aisleway. Both teams get counted out, so they're gone. And the whole thing really comes down to, after everybody kind of gets eliminated, you've got on one side the Powers of Pain, and on the other side you've got Demolition and the Conquistadors, who have managed to survive this whole time. And during this whole match, these two guys would get in the ring, get compromised, get the shit kicked out of them. You think they're gonna lose and finally get eliminated, and something stops them. The wrestler gets distracted, or there's a tag, or he rolls out of the way, or he just gets saved somehow. But time after time, the yellow guys survive. And I had my two cousins. We were all sitting on the floor watching this. We had one of those, you know what I'm talking about, those TVs that sat on the floor. There was basically like a dresser with a screen in it. That's the type of TV we had. Wish I had a picture of it. I'd put it up. So we're all on the floor watching this, and I've got my two cousins who don't watch wrestling that are fucking marking out over the yellow guys. They just keep dying. They're bawling, laughing on the ground. They're like, what? They were watching all this like it was a comedy. And they were like, what the fuck is going on with these yellow guys? How are they surviving? And these little bastards continue to survive all throughout this match, and it was tripping them out. So anyway, you get down to the spot where you got Barbarian and Smash, I think. I know Smash is in the ring. I don't know which Power of Pain he's in there with. Can't remember. So Smash goes to bounce off the ropes, and Fuji, I guess, takes his cane and pulls down the rope, and Smash goes flying through them, injuring his shoulder. And the referee counts him out. He's the legal man. He gets counted out, and Demolition gets eliminated. Axe is fucking pissed. He's yelling at Fuji. And I remember when I saw this, I didn't see Fuji pull the rope. I didn't know what the fuck happened. So I see Axe getting into it with Fuji, and Jesse is on commentary saying, Fuji did that on purpose. I think he pulled the rope down. And it wasn't until they showed the replay that you saw that he did do it on purpose. So you see Smash pissed at Fuji. Fuji's yelling back at, Axe pissed at Fuji. Fuji's yelling back at Axe. Axe finally just shoves Fuji just to push him away, and he goes to, I think he just turns away, and that's when Fuji comes and whacks him on the back with a cane. But then Smash comes to the rescue, who's now gotten up from his injury, grabs Fuji, throws him into Axe, who picks him up and body slams him right on the concrete. And Axe and Smash leave. The crowd doesn't know whether to boo or cheer. I had no fucking idea what was going on. Axe and Smash leave. And then Powers of Pain, who are in the ring just watching this, and the yellow guys, by the way, during the whole thing are just standing there on the apron with their arms in the air. And I remember my cousins getting a kick out of that too. Go back and watch this match. During that whole thing going down between Demolition and Fuji, Conquistadors are just going up there like, what the fuck? So that whole thing happens. Powers of Pain, Barbarian, and Warlord get out of the ring, walk over to the outside, help Fuji up. They dust him off. They kind of bring him back into their corner, and then it's left, one team against one team, Conquistadors versus Powers of Pain, and then the Powers of Pain just fucking annihilate them. Barbarian nails them with the boot and the headbutt or something, and they easily dispose of the Conquistadors and become the sole survivors of the team. And I actually liked their theme music, even though it's super simple. Go back and look up Powers of Pain theme music. Underrated theme. Their theme music starts playing, and they lift Fuji up on their shoulders, and the entire crowd is cheering. So in my brain, and the age that I was at the time, I'm assuming that I'm watching a face turn by Fuji. That's what I thought. I thought Mr. Fuji was a good guy now. And after that, they kept replaying the replay over and over, and Jesse's like, no, Fuji did that on purpose. He pulled down the rope, and then it kind of all starts coming together. As a matter of fact, Demolition would do much like Hogan would do the previous year. They would run down to the ring after the match and beat up the Powers of Pain. And again, the crowd didn't understand that they saw a double turn because the crowd was completely silent. They were cheering for Fuji and the Powers of Pain, but when Demolition hit the ring, beat them up and ran them off, and their music played to close out the segment, the fans were like kind of booing. They didn't get it. And I didn't get it. I would have if I watched this now, I would totally understand. But as a kid, I had no idea what the fuck I was looking at. And it wasn't until later on, Fuji and Powers of Pain actually would do a backstage interview later where Fuji explained himself and said, Demolition got a big head and got too big for their britches. And even Jesse put over the fact that Fuji just plain and simply saw a better product and decided to go with them, even though he was already with the champions, which doesn't make any sense, that he would leave the champions for a team that could potentially win the belts instead of just staying with the champions. I don't know. Or he could have waited to turn heel. Why didn't he wait to turn heel until there was a title match between the two, and then he could have cost Demolition the title? You stupid Mr. Fuji. But anyway, no, Fuji's great. And then that backstage interview, too, with Fuji and the Powers of Pain, Fuji is hilarious. And you can tell what good friends him and Mean Gene are because, Mean Gene was like accusing Fuji of something, and Fuji's like, no way, Gene, just screaming at him. Fucking hilarious. God damn, I miss these times, man. So it was kind of funny that not only did little young MicWork not understand what the fuck was going on, the crowd didn't understand what the fuck was going on either. Well, what the fuck was going on is we had a double turn, which was not something that was very common. And Powers of Pain went heel, Demolition is now a babyface, and that would be your feud. And that was probably a pretty smart move by WWE. Demolition was a great team, and I think Vince always wanted the Road Warriors. And he could get every team except them. Powers of Pain were in the NWA too, doing the Road Warrior-ish gimmick. And WWE put together Bill Eadie and Barry Darsow to create their own type of Road Warriors team. The problem is they became a really good team. I rank, my favorite tag teams in WWE history is like the Hearts, the Bulldogs, and I'd probably put Demolition as number 3, maybe even number 2. I mean, they're a really good team, and they mesh so well together. And for big guys, I thought in a lot of ways they were better wrestlers than the Legion of Doom. Road Warriors had the better look. They were more muscular. They were bigger, the shoulder pads, the whole deal, and they were more iconic. But Demolition was a hell of a team, even though they were probably, admittedly, initially designed to be a Road Warrior knockoff. I think they paved their own path and they carved their own way, and they're one of my favorite tag teams in WWE history. I'd probably put them as my 3rd favorite ever in WWE, especially, or at least in that time period. Maybe not if you include everybody from the 90s and everything else, but at least for that time, Demolition was fucking awesome. And maybe WWE realized that too, and realized that they're the team that has the longer shelf life. And instead of bringing in the Powers of Pain to defeat them and become the new Demolition, they were just going to stick with who they had, turn them baby faces, turn Powers of Pain heel, and then Demolition can defeat them, which is exactly what happened. This whole thing would blow off at WrestleMania 5 in a handicap match. Fuji would join Powers of Pain on a tag team to face Demolition for the titles, and Demolition retained. And it was right after that that the Brainbusters in the summer of '89 would take the belts off of Demolition. But Demolition held the titles for a long time. They held them from WrestleMania 4 all the way past WrestleMania 5. Jesus, they held those belts for a long time. I got to check on the stats on that. I'm curious who held the belts longer, Honky with the Intercontinental belt or Demolition with the tag team titles. And I know the New Day in recent years, just all these years later, has finally defeated that record of the longest running tag champs, but damn, that was a long run by Demolition. And it was funny how that whole thing ended and how nobody kind of really knew what the hell was going on. Because you just didn't see double turns all the time. It's not something you really thought of. Didn't even think it was an option, especially with the way WWE, treated baby faces and heels at the time. It's just not something that was common. Know what I'm saying? Let's go over here. Whose birthday is it? I just saw that. I might have missed it. I saw that it was somebody's birthday, but I don't know who. Tay-Ray Jackson. Happy birthday, man. Thanks for hanging out tonight. I know there's not many people in here tonight, but I wasn't expecting there to be. I just wanted to talk some wrestling, do some Survivor Series related stuff. Do I have any in the cards here? I do not. Shit, I didn't put them up here. But go over to my channel under the pay-per-view and DVD reviews. Current ones, I've got Survivor Series 1995, Survivor Series 2001, and Survivor Series 2003. If you want to hear some Survivor Series related reviews, those are some of my most recent ones that are up on the channel right now. You can check those out between now and Sunday. If you want to just keep yourself in a Survivor Series state of mind, I invite you to check those out. You should enjoy them, especially Survivor Series 2001, because I was there facing the hard cam, and you can see me on that whole entire show. I can't wait to talk about this next match, because this next match is crazy too. They didn't do a women's match this time. They did another men's match, another men's 5-on-5, and this one was captained by Andre the Giant and Rick Rude. Is it Andre and Rude? No, Andre and Bravo are the co-captains, and on the other side, it's Jake the Snake Roberts and Hacksaw Jim Duggan. This one's interesting. So again, one thing I want to mention too about this match is the backstage promo with all of the wrestlers, because if you go back and you watch the heel promo with Team Andre, sad, man. Every single person in the room is dead, including the managers and the person interviewing them. You do a big heel team backstage interview hosted by Mean Gene. You've got Andre the Giant. You've got King Harley, you got Harley Race. He's just regular Harley Race by this point. Mr. Perfect, Dino Bravo, and Ravishing Rick Rude. And all of their managers are there. You've got Frenchie Martin, and you've got Bobby the Brain Heenan. And you've got Mean Gene doing the interview. It is a sad sight. When I was watching it last night, I actually paused it and took a screenshot of it and saved it, just in my own files, because I'm like, man, that's quite the sight to see all those guys, all those legends, all those fucking Hall of Famers no longer with us. I mean, Andre and Race and Perfect and Rude and Bobby, my God. And Bravo and Frenchie. But just sad. But anyway, they're taking on the team of Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Jake the Snake Roberts, Ken Patera again, Tito Santana, and Scott Casey. Now, I feel like the roster was light. They were kind of calling in some jobbers here. We had Sam Houston and Danny Davis in the other match, along with the Conquistadors. Now we've got Scott Casey. They were known to bring in a few jobbers. And I mean, Casey had a track record in Texas, and he had been around, and he was a veteran. But in WWE, he was kind of like a Brady Boone. He was somebody that had talent and could go, but was mostly used as an enhancement talent. I always liken him to Brady Boone, because they basically had the same spot on the card, and they might have even teamed a time or two as well. But Ken Patera, also on his way out. I felt like in 1987 when he was in the main event, he was on his way out. Wasn't doing much here, spending a lot of time putting guys over on TV and on Saturday night's main event. So Ken Patera and Scott Casey were, to me, weak links on the team, and they got eliminated rather quickly. Tito Santana pinned Harley Race after a flying forearm. Now, Harley Race had gotten injured, if you remember. Well, maybe you don't, but there was a match on when he was still the king with Hulk Hogan on Saturday night's main event. This was prior, I don't know how many months before this was. This might have been prior to WrestleMania 4. It was. Okay, so the Race-Hogan match, I do know, took place right after Hogan dropped the belt to Andre. So Hogan was pissed. He was beating the shit out of Race. Harley Race was on the apron, and he was going to do like a top rope belly flop, or not top rope, a belly flop onto Hogan, who was laid across a table. And these aren't like modern day tables. These are like real fucking steel tables. So Hogan's laying on the table. Race dives off the apron. Hogan moves, and Race just bends. Didn't break like the Dudley Boys, just bent the table in half. And that move somehow caused a problem, a health problem for Harley Race, and he had to have some surgery, and he was on the shelf for quite a while. While he was on the shelf, Bobby Heenan decided to put the crown with Haku. Islanders had split up. I think Tama had left the company. And so many teams from the previous year, the Dream Team, the Bees, the Islanders, they were split up by the time we got to 1988. So they had split all those guys up, and you got Haku is your new king. Bobby Heenan just said, you're the king now. They had a coronation for him and everything. So when Race came back and he was healthy, he was still a heel, but now he wasn't the king anymore. He was just Harley Race. So he kind of was directionless. He would actually go on to the Royal Rumble in January and face Haku for the crown, which Haku would win. And I think Harley was gone and back to the NWA after that. So yeah, that was kind of the end of Harley Race. Kind of cool to see Harley Race and Rick Rude on the same team as well, because they would be spent a lot of time in NWA or WCW together as well. But anyway, Tito knocks out Race with, and Tito's another guy. Don't forget, the year before, Strikeforce, and then they had split up, and because Martel was hurt, and they would reform the team at WrestleMania 5, but then Martel would turn. So even Tito, that's a fourth tag team that is not together, that was together the year before. Hacksaw Jim Duggan jumps in the ring and uses his 2x4 at one point, getting himself disqualified. And Tito gets eliminated as well, leaving poor Jake in there against four guys. So aside from Harley Race, the entire team is intact. You got Andre, you got Bravo, Perfect, and Rude all in there against Jake the Snake Roberts. So Jake is fucked. He winds up pinning Ravishing Rick Rude with a DDT, and this was one of my favorite parts of the match because Andre and Jake were in the middle of that feud because Jake had thrown the snake on him and Andre had the heart attack and the whole deal, right? So Andre's already scared shitless of the snake, and he's also pissed at Jake Roberts. And after Jake pins Rick Rude, and just a brilliant move, Andre just jumps in the ring. And Jake, you got to remember, up until this point, has taken an assload of punishment. He's already fucking dead, as it is. He nails Rude with a quick DDT and pins him. Andre jumps in the ring, and it's one of my favorite Andre the Giant moments in his entire career. He looked legitimately angry, mad, and vicious, and for once in my life, like as a kid, I was legit scared. I was like Undertaker scared of Andre the Giant. He gets in the ring, grabs a hold of Jake, and just beats the fuck out of him and just choking him in the ropes. He's just viciously choking, and Andre's got those fucking banana finger hands, and he's got them both wrapped around Jake's neck, just squeezing the fucking life out of Jake, and basically squeezes him and beats the crap out of him until the referee disqualifies him, intentionally gets himself disqualified. And I remember as Andre's just killing and murdering Jake. It's like a tiger on a gazelle or something. I mean, just mauling poor Jake Roberts. Referee calls for the bell. The fans like pop, like, oh, Andre the Giant's eliminated. Like Jake might have a chance, but he just murdered him. So Andre gets disqualified. Jake is literally dead in the ring. And the minute Andre exits the ring, Mr. Perfect slithers right in, covers Jake, 1, 2, 3, bam. And like Jesse Ventura said, Andre did what he had to do. He didn't care. He did not give a shit if he was disqualified or whatever. He was going to make sure his team won, and he did. And it was brilliant. It's why Andre's smart captain. So your survivors in this match, continuing with the theme of the previous year of having kind of odd people survive, like in that tag match, you had Dino Bravo and Mr. Perfect as your two survivors in this match. Now, Mr. Perfect had just come in. He was right off of the heels of that Loser Leaves Town match with Lawler for the AWA title. And he hadn't even switched over to the singlet yet. He was just wrestling in trunks, still trying to kind of find his niche in the WWE. And by the time we would get into 1989, Hennig would be well on his way to fucking stardom, and he'd be a champion in less than 2 years after that. So that was always a fun match just because of how vicious Andre the Giant was and how memorable it was. Those were fucking great times, man. All right, we got the main event coming up next. One more match to discuss here, and then we'll talk a bit, and then I will get out of here. I'm gonna go back over to the chat. Oh, what's up, Brett? Good to see you. Your first Survivor Series was 1990. Yeah, that's a good one. That's the debut of The Undertaker, and I've talked about this before. I even did a whole video on this as it relates to The Undertaker, but we're currently in the year of 2019. I don't know what year you guys are watching this. You might be seeing this 5 years later, so who knows what happens. But 1 year from now, in 2020, the Survivor Series falls or the Survivor Series could potentially fall on the same day that The Undertaker debuted in 1990. Survivor Series 1990 was on November 22nd. November 22nd of 2020, next year, is a Sunday. And it's not even or Thanksgiving weekend, which I think WWE likes to keep Survivor Series away from that now. I don't think we're going to see a Survivor Series on Thanksgiving weekend or after. I think it's always going to be before. So that's the day they need to do it next year. If WWE does not book Survivor Series on November 22nd, they are fools. And how awesome would that be to see The Undertaker? He's made it this long, right? What, we got one more year? What's one more year? At this point, what's one more year? If The Undertaker can stick around until next year and finally have his farewell retirement match on the exact 30th anniversary of his debut. I know technically he worked a TV taping a couple days before. Fuck that. We're not counting that. We're counting Survivor Series. That's what WWE acknowledges in the history books, and that's what we acknowledge, or we need to acknowledge too. So I think that would be the perfect time for The Undertaker to retire. Next year, November 22nd, 2020. Complete little side note there. But Brett, thank you too for the $5, dude. Appreciate it. Awesome nostalgic review. I love doing these, man. And I love this one kind of just being a more like just casual talk, because I didn't really want to have to come up and do a full like podcast style review. I wanted to kind of talk and reminisce a little bit. I thought that would be more fun, and you guys can share some stuff in the chat and maybe even learn a thing or two about the old and timey days. But the main event was fun, much like the previous year. God, this one was crazy. So in this one, you've got co-captains. Where am I? Macho Man, Randy Savage, and Hulk Hogan. And like I said earlier, the whole co-captain deal was probably started because of the ego of Mr. 24-inch Pythons there, and you can't not be the captain, right? So it's Hogan and Savage co-captaining against Akeem and the Big Boss Man, which at the time they were feuding with both, so the co-captains thing does work, but I always still thought it was silly. So Team Hogan consists of Randy Savage, Hillbilly Jim, Coco Beware, and Hercules. Now, Hillbilly Jim and Hogan go way back. Hogan brought Hillbilly into the WWE, gifted him his first pair of black ring boots, and they have a big history. They were BFFs for the, in the mid-'80s there. And Hercules, who was a heel the previous year, is now turned babyface when Bobby Heenan, I don't know if you guys remember this or know this about his history, Bobby Heenan in storyline tried to sell Hercules to the $1 Million Man as his slave. It is a good thing Hercules is white. I mean, my God, could you even fucking imagine the shit that they did? So Bobby Heenan tried to sell him to $1 Million Man as his slave. Hercules is like, nah, fuck that, and winds up turning babyface over it. Randy Savage endorses him on the Brother Love show. I remember Savage coming out there during an interview with Hercules with Elizabeth and saying, I appreciate what you did, brother, and shakes his hand, and and they became friends, Savage and Hercules. So Hercules would be on the babyface team this year with Hogan and all those guys. They'd be taking on Big Boss Man, Akeem, the Red Rooster, King Haku, and Ted DiBiase. So that's a hell of a team there as well. I used to be on Facebook, and I deleted my profile a long time ago. But when I was on Facebook, One Man Gang, George, I forget his name, he actually accepted my friend request, and we were friends for a while. And he would always post like updates and talk about what was going on with his life in Louisiana. And it always seemed like he was going through hard times. He went through a couple of hurricanes, maybe lost his house. And during the whole thing, always seemed to remain pretty chipper. He doesn't seem like he's a guy that's got all sorts of like drug and alcohol and depression issues, or, he's not Marty Jannetty, basically is what I'm saying. So whatever's going on with the One Man Gang these days, I hope he's doing well. And if any of you guys keep tabs on him, I hope he's doing all right, because he always seemed like a legitimately nice man. And he had one hell of a stupid ass gimmick back then. I loved the One Man Gang character. He was in the main event the previous year too, on Team Andre. This year, they changed him into Akeem, the African Dream. I guess at the time, I didn't realize how fucking stupid it was, but as I got older, it's just like, what the hell were they thinking with this Akeem shit? So anyway, and they were called the Twin Towers. Him and Big Boss Man was like the name of their team. And of course, the Red Rooster, who was recently brought in by Bobby Heenan, and they were making the deal on TV. It looked like right off the bat they had planned to turn the Rooster babyface, because upon his arrival, they were saying it constantly on TV. Bobby Heenan was reminding everybody that Rooster has limited ability, but Bobby thinks he can make a star out of him anyway. So they basically kind of always insulted Rooster. Oh, he's not big, he's not strong, and he sucks. But under the tutelage of Bobby Heenan, maybe he can go somewhere. So this whole thing was designed for him to turn babyface. And he would be the first one eliminated. Got eliminated rather quickly. And did Savage hit him with the elbow? I can't remember how he got eliminated. I'm pretty sure it was a Savage elbow. And as he's leaving, you had all the managers because you had Bobby and Slick out there. Was it Bobby and Slick and, no, just Bobby and Slick. Oh, and Virgil. So Bobby and Slick are out there and they're all yelling at Red Rooster. Ted DiBiase's yelling at him. I told you that guy was no good, Slick said. And they're all giving poor Rooster shit for getting eliminated early. But on the other side, Coco Beware and Hillbilly Jim were gone shortly after that. It didn't take them a whole lot of time to get eliminated. And I loved what Jesse Ventura said about Coco Beware. He goes, Coco Beware's got that James Brown hairstyle, fried, dyed, and laid to the side, which was just a funny fucking line. So Coco and Hillbilly at that time didn't have huge spots on the card either. Hillbilly had kind of fallen a notch or two. You know, after his association with Hogan, that kind of went away and the two didn't have a whole lot to do with each other, although they did reference the friendship between the two during this match. And they did have a little fun spot where Hogan and Hillbilly put their arms around each other and hit a double big boot on somebody. So that was a fun little throwback to the past. Even in 1988, they were doing throwbacks. Hercules and DiBiase, you know, they're the big rivals on each side there. They eventually get into it as well. Herc is just beating the crap out of DiBiase. I am no man's slave. But he winds up kind of getting distracted a little bit and allows Ted DiBiase to roll him up for the win. So now you've got Coco, Hillbilly, and Herc all gone after Red Rooster got eliminated. So you've got Hogan and Savage now on one side against four guys. Well, DiBiase is so happy about him eliminating Hercules, and he's celebrating with his back turned. Savage hops right in the ring, grabs DiBiase from behind, rolls him up for the 1-2-3, and gets a quick pin, eliminating DiBiase. And it was funny because I remember when I was watching this, when Savage pinned DiBiase, you could see the crack of his ass. He pulled his tights down all the way, but on the network version, you don't. You don't see his crack, which sucks. Everybody needs a little $1 Million Man crack. But they blurred it out. They actually took the time to blur the 1 second of DiBiase crack off the WWE network, which is like, why bother? You know, it's not like it's offensive. You didn't see his balls hanging down. It was just like his ass for a second. I'll have to go back and watch and see if they dubbed or if they blurred out Shawn Michaels' ass from WrestleMania 10 in the ladder match. But anyway, fun little spot there. So this is when the main event gets nuts. So after Savage pins DiBiase, it's Savage and Hogan against Haku, Bossman, and Akeem. Hogan and Bossman start getting into it. They're in the middle of that big feud. They did that angle on the Brother Love show where Big Bossman beat down Hogan, and that was Hogan's latest big bad heel to have to contend with while Macho was champion. So they finally get in the ring, start mixing it up. Hogan just beats his ass. I think he even picks him up and slams him. At some point, they wind up on the outside of the ring, and Bossman gets the nightstick and starts wearing out Hogan and then handcuffs Hogan to the bottom rope. And we're using a pair of those like really long handcuffs. So Hogan is handcuffed to the bottom rope. He can't go anywhere. And Bossman is just wearing him out. And Jesse Ventura said, he goes, he's beating a confession out of Hogan with the Billy Club or the nightstick or whatever. So he's just murdering poor Hogan. Hogan's like unconscious with his hand draping off the ring post there, handcuffed to it. And Bossman got himself disqualified. So, because he was on the outside, or I think counted out or DQ'd. Either way, it doesn't matter because he was using the nightstick. So he's either counted out or DQ'd. Then he gets in the ring and starts helping Akeem double team Randy Savage. And he's using the nightstick, and the two of them are just murdering poor Randy Savage until Akeem gets disqualified. So just like that, after the Twin Towers put down quite a hurting on Hogan and Savage, they both get eliminated, leaving Savage in there all by himself against Haku, but not really because you still have Hogan on the outside of the ring. So the Twin Towers leave, but Slick stays. Slick stays behind, and they explain this in commentary because Slick has the keys to the cuffs, so the referee is letting him stay instead of, I don't know, making him give him the keys. So anyway, Slick's out there, and Savage is getting his fucking ass kicked. Now, Haku just basically has a 10-minute long squash match with Randy Savage during all of this. Just one move after another. Punches, kicks, thrust kicks, suplexes, splashes. Randy Savage is a human fucking punching bag in the ring for 10 straight minutes with Haku, but he's surviving everything. He's kicking out. He's surviving. Even one time, I think he moves out of the way or he gets Haku down and he starts crawling over to the corner to tag Hogan, but nobody's there because Hogan is handcuffed and Savage doesn't know what's going on. So Slick, like an idiot, is dangling the keys in front of Hogan and taunting him with the keys to the handcuffs. Eventually, something happens, and Hogan's either able to grab Slick or knock him down or something. Slick gets taken out, and he's on the ground, and then Hogan screams for Elizabeth. He's like, go. He's pointing. He goes, go get the keys. So Elizabeth runs over to Slick and grabs the keys out of his pocket, and Jesse Ventura's freaking out. She's pickpocketing Slick. I can't believe it. So he thinks Liz is a pickpocket. So she grabs the keys, gives him to Hulk Hogan, and she unties Hulk Hogan from the handcuffs. He's out. He's freed now. He jumps up to the ring apron just in time for Randy Savage to get a super kick from Haku, and he falls backwards right into Hulk Hogan, making the tag. Hogan gets in the ring, 3 punches, big boot, leg drop. Haku is toast, and Hogan and Savage are your survivors. Now, what was interesting here is they were just this subtle tease. It's what WWE did so fucking well around this time, is that from the minute Randy Savage won that belt, they planted the seed that day that there are going to be troubles ahead for the Mega Powers. And it started at SummerSlam. That was when Elizabeth had the little short skirt on, and she distracted DiBiase and Andre, allowing Hogan and Savage to win the match. And Hogan kind of like grabbed Elizabeth's ass once, and then he picked her up and hugged her, and the same thing happened here. So Savage, not only does he crawl to the corner to get a tag from Hogan earlier on, and Hogan wasn't there, now the match is somehow over. Savage thinks it's fucking Christmas. He doesn't know where he is. And all he sees when he kind of comes to is Hogan picking up Elizabeth and hugging her, celebrating the victory. And as the two of them are raising their hands, Savage is looking at Hogan and he's pointing and he's kind of looking around. And as a kid, I noticed this. I noticed that something was up with Savage, and I'm like, And I think that's right when I was like, oh yeah, WrestleMania, baby, because they already did the funny thing at SummerSlam. Now it's getting a little bit more intense at Survivor Series. Then it would boil over at the Royal Rumble in January when I think Savage and Hogan got into it in the middle of the Royal Rumble. Savage got eliminated or something, and the two guys started pushing and shoving, and Elizabeth had to break them up, and then they, got back together before they officially broke up on the main event on NBC in February. So this was all starting to tease that WrestleMania match. Savage had just about had enough here, and watching him get all pissed at Hulk Hogan and kind of looking at him funny was interesting, and it was really, the whole feud and the whole angle was so brilliantly done because they literally built it for a year. They set it up from the minute Savage won that belt. They knew where they were going for WrestleMania 5. All they had to do was execute it over the last 12 months, or the next 12 months. And I thought they did a great job. And it was such a nice, when you take time to develop a story and build it and run it and have the subtle teases and the hints that the audience at home can see on TV, and then it hits you in the face and explodes. And that's what they did. The Mega Powers would explode at WrestleMania 5. I thought it was so well done looking back. To take that much time into a year-long story, turning Savage heel in the process. To this day, when you look back throughout history, Randy Savage and CM Punk, and there could be more, you guys have to help me. Randy Savage and CM Punk, besides those guys, can you think of any other wrestler that turned heel in the middle of their world title run? That's some trivia for you, because I have thought about this before. There might be somebody in extreme recent times, but to the best of my recollection, a WWE champion anyway. I don't know if in the NWA, they might have done something funny with Flair and Hogan there at one point. Yeah, they did like a double turn with Flair and Hogan in like 99, didn't they? Maybe that counts. I don't know. But Savage and Punk are the only two guys that I can think of that turn heel. Punk turned heel on that Raw. Remember when he attacked The Rock? So it's rare. It's rare to see that. So for that whole thing to happen throughout the course of that year and then build up to Hogan and Savage at WrestleMania 5, thought was brilliant, really well done, and exciting as hell for a fan my age to be able to watch. And you knew the writing was on the wall for Savage. Hogan was going to beat him and win the belt back, but Savage had a year-long run. And they did an excellent job of creating that issue between the two. And then Savage would get so crazy and so intense near the end of it, attacking Hogan on the main event, and all of the promos, all the intense coked out, vein exploding promos that Savage had directed at Hogan leading up to WrestleMania 5 was all wonderful, and all of this was a part of it. Survivor Series was a part of it. SummerSlam was a part of it, and it was awesome. And I'm happy to say my two cousins, Eric and Troy, were thoroughly entertained by this. I think the pop of the night came. There was a spot in this match. Oh my God, I can't believe I forgot to mention this earlier. There's a spot in the main event where Hogan like chases Slick down the aisleway, and he nails Slick with a punch. And the way Slick sells the punch, it was like SNL. It was like sketch comedy or something. He hits Slick, and Slick just fucking hits the ground like he got like hit with a bazooka or something. And both of my cousins laughed their balls off. And that's when you know, like, wrestling is kind of silly to fans that don't take it seriously like us. You know, that's why I think, you know, these Joey Janela and Orange Cassidy debates are so fucking stupid, because everybody thinks wrestling is fake. You can't get any faker than it is, you know? So when you, even back then, you were entertaining two people that weren't wrestling fans, but they weren't turned off by wrestling. They were entertained by it. Those two guys that never watched wrestling unless they were around me were laughing their ass off and marking out for a good portion of this show. And they didn't even care about wrestling because it was entertaining. And they did a good job of, you know, entertaining a large audience, because they know that on Thanksgiving night, you're likely not only going to have wrestling eyes, wrestling fan eyes, and wrestling fan eyes only on your show. It's going to be a whole bunch of eyes, because it's probably going to be viewed in a family setting on Thanksgiving in a living room where there's a whole bunch of relatives and random people around. And that's exactly what happened in my household. And I was able to show this show and watch this show with a couple of people that don't normally watch wrestling, and they were thoroughly entertained. So props to Hogan and Savage and Gorilla and Bobby and Andre and Perfect and Hillbilly and Rude and Savage and Steamboat and all you guys, Demolition, Heart Foundation, Bulldogs. I miss these days so much, and it was a great time. Great time to fucking be alive and be a wrestling fan. And like I said, I couldn't imagine if we had everything we have now back in these days. If I was able, after Survivor Series, to go up in my room and do a live stream in 1988, I don't even know what that would look like. So anyway, those are my memories of Survivor Series 1988 and 1987. Hope you guys enjoyed that trip down memory lane. I'm just going to peek over here in the chat and see if anybody has anything to say. Anybody have any comments on that CM Punk and Randy Savage thing? I don't have any other suggestions yet, but I'm trying to think of anyone else that's turned heel like that. I don't think there has been any. The Chosen One, if you listen to Bruce Pritchard and Tony Schiavone, I can't spell his name, tell stories. Hogan and Warrior turned out to not be all that bad comparatively. Other wrestlers have done far worse things. I don't know if you mean personal life or in the ring. Yeah, Warrior I'm never going to be a fan of personally. Hogan, you know, made my peace with. I chalk most of the things up, dumb things he does, just him being stupid. But you can't deny their mark on wrestling. You can't deny what a big part of this time period they were, you know, in both years. You know, Warrior was not around for the 87 show, but, you know, Hogan was a big part of 87 and 88. So was Savage, so was Warrior. These guys were big parts of wrestling. You know, I still have. I told you guys one of these days I'm going to break them out. They're in storage. I still have the majority of all of my 1980s LJN figures, the big rubber dolls. I've got Hogan, I've got Andre in there, and Bundy, and all sorts of them. So one of these days I'll bust them out and maybe do some sort of a wrestling memorabilia and collection video, because I have stuff in the shelf behind me I have a vaulted ceiling, and it goes all the way up to the top of the ceiling. That's how far up that shelf goes. It's basically like two of those IKEA desks or shelves stacked on top of each other. So my shit is everywhere, and it might make for a really fun kind of nostalgic video one day. Go through some of my magazines and my videotapes and my video games, and also belts and figures and all sorts of random shit I've kept over the years. Maybe one day we'll get around to doing that. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and bounce around out of here now. We have been going for 2 hours. Awesome. I was kind of hoping that. I was thinking it would be about a 2-hour stream. I'd probably dedicate an hour to each show, and that's what we did. And I hope you guys enjoyed this retro review. I might make this kind of a regular thing, because what I like to try to do for the big pay-per-views like Rumble, Mania, Survivor Series, and SummerSlam is do a couple of related videos during those months. So like this year I did one regular like podcast review of Survivor Series 2001, and then I did this one that's kind of like a live discussion of a couple of shows. I might do the same thing for the Royal Rumble. I'll do one Royal Rumble review, like regular review, and then we'll do another fun like Sunday night live stream the week before the pay-per-view where we'll talk about, I don't know, maybe we'll give another look back at Royal Rumble 1992 or something. We'll talk about Ric Flair's epic victory in that and basically revisit that, which I know I've talked about before. So I'll try to come up with some ideas for January, and I've got a lot of fun stuff planned for December. 2 big This Day in History is coming up on the really fun and memorable Bret Hart and British Bulldog match from In Your House. When I do that review or that This Day in History, I want to tag Jim Cornette in it because I'm curious what his thoughts on this match was, because he was at ringside and it was really interesting. So I'm hoping that I can tag him in it and he'll notice it and maybe he'll comment on it, because it's a match that's really like significant to me as a wrestling fan, that In Your House 95 match. Such a good match between Bret and Bulldog. And then for a fun one, just for fun, I'm going to do a This Day in History on when Shawn Michaels lost the European title to Triple H on Monday Night Raw in 1997. That was another really fun and kind of a kooky day in wrestling. So anyway, I am out of here. You guys have a great rest of your Sunday night. I'll be back up here tomorrow night reacting to Monday Night Raw. Let me know everything you thought about these shows, your memories of them if you have any, and anything else you want to say, hit me with them in the comments below. You guys have a good rest of your night, and good luck with your Monday tomorrow. Be good. Peace.